Good evening, esteemed companions. Tonight our thoughts shall embark upon a deliberate and tranquil exploration into the ancient Greek systems of justice and the quietude of penal actions that profoundly influenced an entire civilization. These are not grand narratives of legendary heroes or monstrous antagonists, but rather something profoundly more human. The ordinary methods by which individuals confronted transgression, disgrace, and the ensuing ramifications in a world vastly different from our contemporary existence. Our journey commences with a narrative woven from bronze, fire, and the peculiar manifestations of justice as it once unfolded in the ancient realm. One might envision oneself standing beneath the scorching sun of ancient Sicily, approximately in 560 BC, observing skilled artisans apply the finishing touches to an unparalleled creation. It assumes the form of a bull, yet it bears no resemblance to any bovine creature that ever grazed a verdant pasture. This particular effigy is fashioned entirely from bronze, possessing a hollow interior and an ingeniously designed door situated along its flank. The metallic surface scintillates under the Mediterranean sunlight, simultaneously radiating both beauty and a terrifying ominousness. The conceptualizer of this bronze bull was an individual named Perillo, who harbored the conviction that his ingenuity was exceptionally astute. He had presented himself before the court of Pharis, the tyrannical ruler of Akragas, bearing what he genuinely believed to be the consummate gift for a sovereign renowned for his cruelty. "Your Excellency," Perillo had declared, executing a profound bow, "I have engineered for you the most ingenious method of execution ever conceived." As one observes the bronze workers meticulously polishing the bull's surface, one can almost discern Perillo's detailed exposition of his invention to the formidable tyrant. The condemned individual, he would have explained, would be securely enclosed within the bull, and a conflagration would be kindled beneath its metallic form. As the bronze gradually accrued heat, the person confined within would, well, the specific particulars are perhaps too distressing for our tranquil evening's contemplation. However, here lies the element of which Perillo was most immensely proud. He had meticulously devised an intricate network of pipes and resonant chambers within the bull's head, crafted to transmute the victim's anguished cries into sounds remarkably akin to the deep, resonant lowing of a bull. It is indeed a disquieting contemplation, is it not, that an individual could invest such profound creativity and meticulous craftsmanship into an apparatus explicitly designed to inflict profound suffering. The bronze artistry itself was undoubtedly of an exquisite caliber. One can readily imagine the countless hours devoted to perfecting each sinuous curve, ensuring the seamless integration of every joint, and meticulously burnishing every surface until it gleamed with the luster of pure gold. Nevertheless, Pharis, despite his inherent cruelty, possessed a peculiar sense of ironic justice that Perillo had entirely failed to anticipate. According to the historical accounts provided by Diodorus, upon Perillo's completion of his invention's demonstration, the tyrant uttered words to the effect of, "How truly remarkable, Perillo." Yet I am inclined to believe that the inaugural individual to experience your creation should, in fact, be its very inventor. Do you not concur? Chateauquin. And thus, Perillo inadvertently became the initial victim of his own malevolent contrivance. There resides a certain chilling rectitude in that outcome, does there not? The profound notion that those who fabricate instruments of torment might ultimately find themselves subjected to the very devices of their own making. One might now imagine traversing the bustling agora, where hushed whispers disseminate the news of this extraordinary event. Ancient peoples held a particular fondness for narratives such as this. Tales where presumed cleverness spectacularly backfires, where the cunning hunter unexpectedly becomes the quarry. It was precisely the kind of anecdote that would be recounted around supper tables for successive generations, accompanied by knowing shakes of heads at the sheer folly of human aspiration. The bronze bull itself, assuming its historical existence, would have necessitated an immense degree of specialized skill for its fabrication. Bronze, working in ancient Sicily, constituted a highly advanced artistic discipline. One would have required an intricate understanding of how to formulate the perfect alloy, typically comprising approximately 90% copper and 10% tin, and precisely how to elevate it to the optimal casting temperature. The casting process would have been executed in distinct sections, subsequently meticulously welded together. The sophisticated sound chambers that were the source of Perillo's immense pride would have demanded an understanding of acoustic principles remarkably advanced for that particular historical epoch. Yet here lies the truly compelling aspect of this narrative. Its historical veracity might be entirely unfounded. Many contemporary historians posit that the bronze bull was more likely a legendary account, a moralistic fable rather than a verifiable historical occurrence. Ancient scribes held a deep affection for these types of stories because they served to impart crucial lessons concerning hubris and the inevitable workings of justice. Whether the event genuinely transpired holds less significance than what the populace profoundly believed regarding the nature of justice and punishment. One might now visualize oneself seated beneath the dappled shade of a venerable olive tree, listening intently as an aged man recounts this very story to a circle of attentive children. He embellishes the narrative with intricate details that likely never appeared in any formal historical record. The mesmerizing way the bronze shimmered, the stark expression on Perillo's countenance upon the dawning realization of his grim destiny, the collective murmur of the crowd as they grasped the unfolding horror. These anecdotal specifics invariably expand and deepen in the retelling, as is the intrinsic nature of oral traditions. The narrative of the bronze bull thus became an integral component of a broader societal discourse concerning justice within the ancient world. Was it morally justifiable for a sovereign to retaliate against cruelty with an equal measure of cruelty? Did Perillo truly merit his agonizing fate, or was Ferris merely demonstrating the extent of his own inherent brutality? These were not facile inquiries in that distant era, nor do they present themselves as uncomplicated questions in our present time. In the gentle warmth of the afternoon air, permeated by the ethereal scent of wild thyme wafting from the distant hills, one's thoughts might turn to the profoundly divergent perspectives ancient peoples held regarding punitive measures. For them, there often existed a deeply ingrained conviction that justice ought to be conspicuously visible, publicly enacted, and dramatically impactful. Private retribution, a clandestine execution shielded behind closed doors, would have utterly failed to fulfill the identical crucial social function. The bronze bull, whether a tangible artifact or a mythical construct, epitomized punishment as a grand spectacle. It was explicitly intended to be witnessed, to be fervently discussed, and to be indelibly remembered. The very elaborateness of its design constituted an essential element of its intended purpose. A straightforward execution would simply not have generated the rich tapestry of stories, the pervasive fear, or the profound sense of divine retribution that a more intricately conceived punishment was capable of inspiring. One might contemplate the craftsman who, if the bull indeed existed, labored upon its creation. Were they fully cognizant of the malevolent purpose of their handiwork? Did they harbor a sense of professional pride in their meticulous efforts? Or did a profound sense of revulsion sicken them as they polished the gleaming bronze? Ancient artisans were frequently either enslaved individuals or workers of low social standing who possessed no agency in selecting their assigned projects. They simply fashioned what they were explicitly instructed to create. The sun now begins its descent over the picturesque Sicilian hills, painting the expansive sky in magnificent hues of orange and purple that evoke the intense glow of superheated bronze. Somewhere in the remote distance, a genuine bull bellows in a verdant field, emitting a sound utterly dissimilar to the mechanical reproduction Parallel had so ingeniously engineered. Nature and artifice, stark reality and imaginative invention. The ancient world was replete with these striking juxtapositions. As the encroaching darkness envelops the landscape, one might ponder the myriad other narratives that emanated from Pharis's court. He maintained his tyrannical rule for a substantial period of 16 years, an ample duration to accumulate a wealth of legends and whispered rumors. Some accounts alleged that he consumed infants, while others claimed he possessed the uncanny ability to discern falsehoods merely by their scent upon a person's breath. The majority of these tales were likely embellished exaggerations, yet they undeniably convey something profound about how people conceptualized tyranny and the pervasive nature of power. The legend of the bronze bull has endured precisely because it captured something intrinsically fundamental about the human condition: our inherent capacity for cruelty, our peculiar fascination with ironic justice, and our abiding captivation with elaborately conceived punishments. It is a narrative that operates on multiple intricate levels, as a purported historical event, as a potent moral lesson, and as compelling entertainment. In one's vivid imagination, one might visualize the bull one final time, now sitting desolate in some forgotten courtyard, gradually acquiring the verdant patina of age, as bronze invariably does, its intricate sound chambers now rendered silent, its once polished surface roughened and scarred by the relentless elements. All that immense craftsmanship and inherent cruelty ultimately reduced to a mere curiosity, a poignant relic from a bygone era when justice assumed dramatically different guises. And as one gently drifts towards the embrace of slumber, one might find oneself contemplating what other peculiar manifestations justice assumed in the ancient world. What other intricate punishments did people invent when the profound concepts of shame and banishment were regarded as equally real and potent as any physical penalty? That infamous bronze bull from Sicily now seems almost merciful when juxtaposed with what one is about to witness in ancient Athens. Here, around 487 BC, there existed a form of punishment so thorough, so utterly complete, that it possessed the power to expunge an individual from their entire established life without the shedding of a single drop of blood. This practice was known as ostracism, and it commenced with an act as deceptively simple as inscribing a name upon a fragment of broken pottery. One might now envision oneself standing in the bustling Athenian agora on a crisp morning in early spring. The air is redolent with the familiar aroma of olive oil emanating from the nearby shops and the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke from myriad cooking fires. All around, citizens are steadily congregating, not the women, nor the enslaved populace, nor the resident foreigners, but rather the free-born male citizens who possess the sacred right to participate in the democratic process. They are each carrying small, irregular pieces of pottery, fractured fragments known as ostraca, and upon each shard they have carefully scratched a singular name. The procedural simplicity of this process is both aesthetically beautiful and profoundly terrifying in its democratic implications. Annually, provided the Assembly voted to convene one, an ostracism vote could be held. There were no formal trials, no presentation of evidence, no impassioned speeches for the defense, merely citizens inscribing the name of the individual they most ardently desired to see removed from Athens for the ensuing 10 years. It functioned akin to a reverse popularity contest, where achieving the highest number of votes paradoxically signified the loss of everything. One observes as an aged potter deliberately drops his piece of pottery into a capacious urn. The shard feels rough and worn in his calloused, weathered hands, merely a fragment of a water jug that had broken the previous week. Yet, in this moment, it has been transformed into an instrument of democracy, a potent weapon capable of utterly destroying a human life without recourse to physical violence. Upon its surface, he has meticulously scratched the name Aristides. Aristides the Just, as he is commonly known, though it appears not everyone believes his particular brand of justice is worthy of continued presence. The arduous counting process unfolds slowly, methodically. Officials painstakingly sort the pottery shards by inscribed name, carefully creating distinct piles upon wooden tables erected in the very heart of the agora. One can distinctly discern the soft, rhythmic clicking sound as shard after shard is added to each accumulating pile. There is an oddly peaceful quality to this sound of democracy in action, even as it systematically dismantles an individual's life, one clay fragment at a time. Silently, an ancient Athenian citizen could participate in the collective act of shaping someone's destiny, one clay fragment at a time. There was a profound, almost primal resonance in the selection of fractured earthenware for this significant civic ritual. These ostraca were not specially crafted voting instruments. Rather, they constituted the commonplace refuse of daily existence. Each shard might have originated from a humble cooking pot, a fragment of a vessel that once held wine, or a piece of a larger container that had previously stored grain. Every individual piece carried the palpable imprints of ordinary life. Telltale discolorations from beverages, scorch marks left by fire, or the smooth, worn texture imparted by countless human hands. One might observe a young man's moment of hesitation before he consigned his pottery fragment to the urn. His particular piece of earthenware was strikingly refined, clearly originating from an expensive vase, and the name inscribed upon it was executed in elegant, practiced strokes. He was casting a vote to ostracize an individual, yet he performed this act with meticulous care, demonstrating commendable penmanship. Even amidst deeds of political removal, the ancient Greeks evidently placed a high value on aesthetic presentation. The individual who ultimately triumphed, or more accurately, suffered defeat, in this specific ostracism was indeed Aristides. Upon the final tally's announcement, His personal mound of pottery shards dramatically dwarfed all others, amounting to more than 6,000 pieces of broken clay. Each one symbolized a citizen who desired his removal, not because he had perpetrated a crime, nor because he had faced any conviction, but simply because a sufficient number of people had grown weary of his continued presence within their polis. One could then follow the swelling throng as the news permeated the narrow, winding thoroughfares of Athens. Aristides was granted a mere 10 days to dismantle his entire existence and depart. This brief window allowed him to liquidate what assets he could, make arrangements for the safekeeping of his property, and bid farewell to his family and associates. He was permitted to take certain personal effects, but his residences, his parcels of land, and his commercial ventures, all of these remained behind, either managed by others or sold off. The inherent brilliance and the underlying cruelty of ostracism resided in its profound capacity to utterly expunge an individual from the public sphere. Aristides could not merely leave Athens and re-establish himself in a neighboring settlement. He was expressly forbidden from the entirety of Attica, a vast territory spanning hundreds of square miles. He would be compelled to commence anew in an utterly foreign land, among people who were entirely unacquainted with his standing or his network of connections. As one walked through the residential quarter where Aristides resided, one might witness him commencing the somber task of disassembling his life. Slaves and household servants bustled about, diligently packing domestic goods into sturdy wooden crates. His wife stood composedly in the central courtyard, overseeing the careful wrapping of cherished possessions. Intricately painted vases, polished bronze mirrors, and delicately carved ivory combs. Her countenance was meticulously controlled, yet the telltale signs of strain were discernible around her eyes. What rendered ostracism particularly harsh was its predisposition to target accomplished individuals. Votes were not squandered on ostracizing inconsequential persons. The system was intrinsically designed to prune tall poppies, to eliminate those who had ascended to excessive prominence, wielded too much influence, or simply become too irksome to their fellow citizens. It represented democracy's unique method of enforcing a particular brand of social equity through enforced expatriation. The very pottery shards employed to cast votes against Aristides themselves narrated compelling tales. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of these fragments, and within these ancient pieces, one can decipher a rich inventory of daily life. Segments of oil lamps that had illuminated countless evening meals, fragments of drinking cups that once held diluted wine at convivial symposiums, and portions of storage jars that had previously contained a family's winter grain supply. Some of these shards exhibited clear indications of having been prepared in advance. It appeared that professional politicians would sometimes engage scribes to inscribe names upon hundreds of pottery pieces, subsequently distributing them to their adherents on the designated voting day. Democracy, even in its ancient Athenian manifestation, was evidently not immune to the machinations of campaign organization and political strategizing. One might find oneself within a pottery workshop, observing a skilled craftsman meticulously examining the shards brought in by voters. From the specific clay composition, the precise firing technique, and the intricate glaze patterns, he could accurately discern which workshops had produced these individual pieces. This one hails from Kerameikos, he might declare, indicating a particular shard. And this one, observe the distinctive red slip. That's characteristic of the potters situated near the Dipolon Gate. The city's everyday refuse had thus been transformed into the fundamental raw material of its political processes. As the sun reached its zenith, one might ponder the striking contrast between this form of retribution and the brutal, crude violence of the bronze bull. Ostracism presented itself as a sophisticated, bloodless, almost gentle method of enforcement. There was no audible screaming, no overt physical torment, merely the quiet, methodical dismantling of a life and the solitary, lengthy walk to the city gates, carrying only what one could manage in a few humble bundles. The psychological repercussions must have been immense. Imagine being Aristides, comprehending that over 6,000 of your fellow citizens, individuals with whom you had shared festivals, served alongside in military campaigns, and encountered in the bustling marketplace, had each inscribed your name upon a piece of pottery and voted for your expulsion, not because you were inherently malevolent, but simply because they had grown weary of your presence. There existed a narrative, likely apocryphal yet profoundly insightful into human psychology, concerning an illiterate farmer who purportedly requested Aristides himself to write Aristides on a pottery shard. When Aristides inquired as to the reason, the farmer supposedly responded, "I am simply tired of constantly hearing him referred to as the just." Even virtues, it seemed, could become tiresome when too frequently acclaimed. One might now be seated in the refreshing shade of the painted stoa, observing the city's ongoing activities while, somewhere else, Aristides continued his packing. Life, it was clear, did not halt for one man's banishment. The pottery workshops diligently continued their production of jars and cups. The verdant olive groves persisted in bearing their silvery green fruit. Ships ceaselessly arrived, laden with grain from distant harbors. Athens would undeniably endure without him. The intriguing aspect of ostracism was its impermanence. After a period of 10 years, the exiled individual was permitted to return, with all their civic rights fully reinstated. It functioned more as a political suspension than a life sentence. Indeed, some ostracized politicians eventually returned to assume significant leadership roles once more. However, a decade was ample time for children to mature, for political alliances to undergo transformations, and for the entire landscape of power to fundamentally shift. As evening descended, and the initial stars began to emerge above the Acropolis, one might reflect upon the multitude of lives that were quietly fractured in this manner. Ancient historical accounts predominantly focused on celebrated politicians such as Aristides, yet ostracism possessed the potential to target anyone who achieved undue prominence. Affluent merchants who became overly ostentatious, generals who secured too many victories, or orators who spoke with excessive eloquence, all could potentially find themselves confronting those accumulating piles of pottery shards. Ultimately, the system gradually fell into disuse, not owing to its inherent cruelty, but rather because it proved increasingly ineffectual. Politicians learned to manipulate its mechanisms, employing ostracism votes as a tool to eliminate their rivals, instead of genuinely safeguarding democracy. The very sophistication that lent it an air of civility also rendered it susceptible to strategic exploitation. That night, as one drifted into slumber, one might contemplate how this subtle form of justice spoke to a profound element of human nature. Our inherent desire to remove individuals who engender discomfort, not through brute force, but through the collective decision to simply cease their inclusion. In our contemporary era of social media and cancel culture, there exists an unsettling familiarity in the collective power of numerous voices uniting to erase someone from public visibility. One vote, one digital click, one shard at a time. Having witnessed the quiet, almost imperceptible erasure of ostracism, one's attention might then be drawn to a distinctly different form of punishment, one that unfolded directly within the vibrant core of Athens, where it was visible to all. The agora was far more than a mere marketplace. It served as a theater of public disgrace, where public humiliation was enacted daily, akin to a continuous civic drama that never concluded. One might stand near the central fountain, where the morning crowd was at its densest. Merchants meticulously arranged their wares on wooden tables. Customers engaged in spirited negotiations over prices. Children playfully chased each other amidst the stalls, yet one's gaze would be irresistibly drawn to a wooden platform situated near the tholos, the circular edifice where the city's executive officials convened. Upon this platform stood a man one did not recognize, but from the manner in which people pointed and whispered, it was unequivocally clear that everyone else knew precisely who he was and the reason for his presence. His name was Lysander, and 3 days prior, he had been apprehended for falsifying his measurements at the bustling grain market. Not outright theft, precisely, but rather employing measures that were infinitesimally too small, thereby illicitly skimming a small profit from each transaction. It was the sort of transgression that, in our modern world, might warrant a monetary fine. However, in ancient Athens, the consensus was that public shame constituted a more potent instructor than any financial penalty. Lysander was thus compelled to stand on this platform from the first light of dawn until the setting of the sun for 5 consecutive days, conspicuously displaying a wooden sign around his neck that proclaimed his offense in large, unmistakable letters. The sign itself was artfully painted, for even public disgrace adhered to artistic standards in Athens, featuring bold red letters against a pristine white background, legible from across the expanse of the agora. It declared, "I am Lysander, the grain seller who cheats his measures." One might observe people approaching the platform throughout the morning. Some pointed and openly laughed. Others shook their heads in palpable disgust. A few paused to deliver impromptu lectures on the virtues of honesty and civic duty. Children were hoisted onto their parents' shoulders to gain a clearer vantage point, as if public humiliation were an instructive spectacle meticulously designed to impart virtue through negative example. What would most powerfully strike an observer was the profound extent to which this punishment seamlessly integrated shame into the very social fabric of the city. Lysander possessed no means of concealing his transgression or pretending it had never occurred. Every individual who purchased grain in the agora would henceforth know precisely who he was and what he had done. His countenance would become inextricably linked with dishonesty in the collective consciousness of thousands of citizens. The morning sun, now a formidable presence, intensified its rays, causing beads of perspiration to form and trickle down Lysander's brow. He was bound by strict regulations, forbidden from the solace of sitting, denied the simple act of shielding his head from the elements, and prohibited from consuming sustenance or drink, save for the fleeting moments when a city official offered him a meager sip of water. This physical ordeal, though undeniably harsh, served as merely a prelude to the profound social degradation he was enduring. While his body was subjected to suffering, his public standing and good name were being systematically and comprehensively annihilated. Nearby, two women engaged in hushed conversation, their voices carrying faintly as they meticulously inspected an array of pottery at an adjacent market stall. "His wife must be utterly humiliated," one remarked, her tone laced with commiseration. "She will undoubtedly find it impossible to ever again show her face at the communal fountain." The other woman affirmed with a knowing nod, her expression conveying shared understanding. "And his poor children. Imagine the torment of attending school when everyone is acutely aware that their father is the deceitful grain merchant." The pervasive stain of shame, much like an insidious oil, inexorably permeated the entire fabric of their family's existence. This particular method of public humiliation, as a form of punitive justice, exhibited an extraordinary degree of ingenuity and efficacy. It obviated the necessity for elaborate carceral institutions, the deployment of vigilant guards, or the intricacies of convoluted legal processes. The strategy was elegantly straightforward. Position the offender in a conspicuous location where all eyes could witness their disgrace, explicitly delineate the nature of their transgression, and then permit the relentless pressure of societal judgment to administer the remainder of the sentence. In this ingenious system, the community itself assumed the dual roles of both adjudicator and enforcement mechanism, wielding its collective power with devastating effect. As the day gradually matured, an observer would discern a distinct evolution in the crowd's disposition towards Lysander. The early hours of the morning had drawn a throng of curious onlookers and vociferous critics, their reactions often characterized by harsh condemnation. However, the afternoon brought forth a different segment of the populace, individuals who had known Lysander prior to his fall from grace, former patrons, immediate neighbors, and erstwhile business associates. Their responses were markedly more nuanced, a complex tapestry woven with threads of profound disappointment, a measure of pity for his predicament, and an undeniable undercurrent of anger. Yet there was also a peculiar fascination in witnessing someone they had once known transformed into a living emblem of public wrongdoing. An elderly man, his gait slow and deliberate, approached the elevated platform where Lysander stood. He remained there for a considerable duration, his gaze fixed intently upon the disgraced merchant. Finally, his voice, resonant enough to be heard by those gathered nearby, broke the silence. "Lysander, I purchased grain from you for 15 long years. Your father was a man of unimpeachable honesty. What, I ask you, transpired to bring you to this?" The profound question lingered in the air, much like the ephemeral tendrils of incense smoke, and in response, Lysander's shoulders seemed to slump a little further under its weight. One could not help but be struck by the profoundly personal nature of this particular form of retribution, a stark contrast to the bureaucratic efficiency inherent in ostracism. Ostracism was characterized by its anonymity, thousands of pottery shards bearing no discernible faces. Public humiliation, however, compelled both the dispenser and the recipient of punishment to confront each other directly, eye to eye. Every citizen who passed by the platform, in a subtle but undeniable way, became an active participant in the punishment, implicitly involved in the intricate process of manufacturing shame. The afternoon hours ushered in yet another category of visitors, fellow merchants from the agora, keen to publicly disassociate themselves from the stain of Lysander's misdeeds. They paused by the platform, seizing the opportunity to conspicuously affirm their own probity, ensuring that all within earshot understood their commitment to employing precise measures and their unwavering refusal to defraud their clientele. Lysander's abject shame, ironically, became an advantageous platform for others to conspicuously broadcast their own moral rectitude. A cluster of young men, their demeanor betraying an almost excessive enjoyment of the unfolding spectacle, drew attention. They engaged in jests, playfully tossed small projectiles towards the platform, treating Lysander's deep humiliation as a source of crude amusement. An older, more venerable citizen sharply rebuked them, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. This is a solemn act of justice, not a theatrical performance. Exhibit some measure of respect for the gravity of the process, even if you harbor none for the individual concerned. The young men, momentarily chastened yet still harboring faint grins, reluctantly dispersed. As the sun began its languid descent towards the western hills, one's thoughts inevitably turned to the stark divergence in how ancient societies perceived the concept of privacy compared to contemporary sensibilities. For them, the distinct boundaries that now delineate public and private life were not observed with the same rigidity. One's reputation, one's honor, one's social standing, these were, in a very real sense, communal assets, subject to the collective scrutiny and enforcement mechanisms of the community. The evening crowd, though diminished in number, possessed a palpable intensity. These individuals had specifically journeyed to witness Lysander, to observe the tangible manifestation of justice in progress. Some brought their children, intending to impart a valuable moral lesson. Others were drawn by a simple, raw curiosity, eager to ascertain the countenance of a man who had endured 10 grueling hours of public disgrace. Lysander's face was conspicuously reddened from prolonged exposure to the sun and the elements. His voice, strained and hoarse, bore testament to the few words he had been permitted to utter to the attending officials. A woman, her appearance suggesting a comfortable, well-to-do status, approached the platform. She carried a small earthenware jug of water and a modest piece of bread, a stranger to the observer. She looked up at Lysander, her gaze unwavering, and spoke in a hushed but clear voice. "My own husband, too, once cheated with his measures. 20 years ago, he stood upon this very platform. Afterward, he transformed into the most scrupulously honest merchant in all of Athens. There remains hope for a life of honor, should you choose to embrace it." She gently placed the food and water at the base of the platform, then quietly merged back into the dwindling crowd. This unexpected act of compassion, a small oasis of kindness in a desert of condemnation, resonated with the refreshing impact of a cool breeze on a sweltering day. Public humiliation, therefore, transcended the singular objective of mere punishment. It also contained within its very essence the profound possibility of redemption. The very community that orchestrated and enforced the shame also possessed the inherent capacity to offer forgiveness, to afford the disgraced individual the opportunity to meticulously reconstruct their reputation through a sustained pattern of exemplary conduct. Now seated on the steps of the Stoa, one observed as the last vestiges of daylight began to recede from the sky. Lysander would soon be granted permission to descend from the platform, to return to the presumed solace of his family, and to attempt to find sleep, despite the profound upheaval that had irrevocably altered his life this day. Tomorrow he would once again assume his position, and the day after that, until the entirety of his 5-day sentence was meticulously fulfilled. The agora, once bustling with activity, slowly emptied as merchants meticulously packed away their wares and citizens made their way homeward for their evening repasts. Yet the platform itself remained, a steadfast and enduring structure, a silent testament to the multifaceted utility of this civic space. A vibrant marketplace, a central hub for communal life, and a stark stage for the dramatic performance of justice. Tomorrow, it was conceivable that another individual might occupy that very spot, bearing a different placard, confronting a distinct assembly of onlookers. As preparations were made to depart, a lingering question arose regarding the enduring ramifications of this particular form of punitive justice. Did public shame genuinely foster the creation of more virtuous citizens? Or did it merely cultivate individuals who were more adept at evading detection? And what, one pondered, was the ultimate impact on the community itself? What transformations occurred within a society when shame was so overtly public, so overtly theatrical, so fundamentally central to the collective understanding of morality and transgression? Tonight, as one drifted towards the precipice of sleep, the unsettling imagery of standing upon that platform might intrude upon one's thoughts, exposed to the unsparing judgment of every acquaintance, every familiar face, bearing one's mistakes like an ill-fitting costume in a play for which one had never even auditioned. The platform of shame, in retrospect, now seemed almost benign when juxtaposed with the impending punishment one was about to witness. A sentence that would not merely remove the convicted individual from public sight, but rather from the very fabric of civilization itself. One now stood upon the rugged, inhospitable shoreline of Giaros, a diminutive and barren island situated within the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea. A ship, now a dwindling silhouette, receded into the distant horizon, leaving in its wake a solitary figure upon the desolate beach, possessing nothing more than the clothes upon his back and a meager bundle of essential provisions. His name was Demetrios, and not long ago he had been a respected and esteemed citizen of Athens. 6 months prior, he had been found guilty of embezzling funds from the sacred temple of Athena, a transgression that, while not meriting the ultimate penalty of death, was deemed sufficiently grave to warrant a punishment far more severe than mere public humiliation. The court, after due deliberation, had rendered a verdict of exile, not the temporary political banishment associated with ostracism, but rather a permanent and irrevocable expulsion to one of the numerous small islands that lay scattered across the Aegean, resembling a handful of carelessly strewn pebbles. Giaros, among the array of potential exile islands, stood out for its particular harshness. It measured approximately 6 miles in length and 2 miles in width, its topography dominated by stark rock formations and sparse, scrubby vegetation. It boasted no natural harbors suitable for anchorage and was devoid of any permanent human settlements. A few meager springs yielded brackish water, its taste tainted by the unmistakable tang of salt and minerals. While some wild goats roamed its desolate landscape, along with seabirds that frequented its shores and fish that inhabited the surrounding waters, there was little else to sustain human existence. One observed Demetrios as he meticulously surveyed his new, stark surroundings. He appeared to be a man in his early 40s, accustomed to the inherent comforts of urban life, the regularity of satisfying meals, the security of a well-appointed house, the convenience of servants to attend to manual labors, and the intellectual stimulation of friends offering engaging conversation and companionship. Now, he stood utterly alone on a beach composed of dark, volcanic sand, his ears assaulted by the relentless, ceaseless rhythm of waves crashing against stone, a sound that would undoubtedly become his primary, if not sole, companion for the remaining duration of his existence. The vessel that had transported him to this desolate outpost was slated to return in a year, perhaps two, its purpose being to ascertain whether he had managed to survive and to deliver a minimal consignment of provisions, a small quantity of grain, a flask of oil, a handful of rudimentary tools. However, there existed no explicit guarantee of rescue, no firm promise of an eventual repatriation to the comforts of civilization. Exile to these remote islands was conceived as a definitive, irreversible act, a method of expelling an individual from the societal collective with such absolute finality that their physical existence might as well be extinguished, save for the fact that their actual demise was left to the vagaries of chance and their own intrinsic resourcefulness. One followed Demetrios as he commenced his initial exploration of his new, unforgiving world. The island's interior proved even more arduous than its coastline. A labyrinth of rocky hills cloaked in thorny, resilient shrubs, interspersed with parched stream beds that might, on rare occasions, carry water during the brief rainy season. Caves offered potential, albeit rudimentary shelter, provided one was prepared to share their confines with bats and whatever other indigenous creatures had already staked their claim. The psychological ramifications of this particular punishment were, in all likelihood, far more devastating than the purely physical hardships. Demetrios, like the vast majority of human beings, was inherently a social creature. His life had been intricately interwoven with the constant hum of conversation, with the predictable and comforting rhythms of urban existence, and with the reassuring knowledge that assistance was readily accessible should the need arise. Now, he confronted an oppressive silence, broken only by the mournful whisper of the wind, the ceaseless roar of the waves, and the occasional piercing cry of a seabird. Amidst the stark coastal landscape, punctuated only by the intermittent shriek of a seabird, the observer notes a solitary figure commencing the arduous task of fire-starting. From his meager collection of provisions, carefully preserved from the ocean's damp embrace during the arduous sea journey, he extracts flint, steel, and a small quantity of desiccated tinder. A discernible tremor runs through his hands, not a shiver born of the chill, but rather an indication of the profound weight of the predicament confronting him. This nascent flame represents more than a mere source of heat or a means to prepare sustenance. It signifies his inaugural endeavor to forge the rudimentary foundations of human society within an environment utterly devoid of such structures. The sagacious populace of ancient Greece harbored a deep comprehension that banishment to insular outposts constituted a multifaceted demise, a social obliteration, a civic cessation, and the ultimate expiration of all elements that imbued existence with significance. An individual condemned to a desolate isle such as Gyaros found themselves irrevocably excluded from communal festivities, disenfranchised from the democratic process of the assembly, barred from witnessing dramatic theatrical productions, and prevented from engaging in the profound philosophical dialogues that rendered Athenian daily life intellectually vibrant and fulfilling. Such individuals were thereby severed from every aspect that the Hellenic mind deemed quintessentially human and integral to a flourishing life. As the sun ascended to its zenith, casting its brilliant rays upon the landscape, the observer beheld the shimmering spectacle of light reflecting across the aqueous expanse encircling the island. This vista possessed a stark, uncompromising beauty, a symphony of cerulean and alabaster hues, punctuated by dazzling, restless motion, yet it simultaneously presented itself as an insurmountable impediment. This vast body of water symbolized an immense chasm, separating Demetrios from every familiar aspect of his former existence. Even hypothetically, should he possess the capability to construct a vessel, an endeavor for which the island offered exceedingly scanty resources, the formidable currents and capricious meteorological phenomena characteristic of the Aegean Sea rendered such an undertaking perilous in a diminutive craft. History recounts that some individuals subjected to such ostracism ultimately succumbed to insanity, overwhelmed by the profound solitude. Conversely, others reportedly discovered a peculiar serenity within the unadorned imperatives of survival. A select few even asserted that their banishment had, in fact, been a liberating endowment, emancipating them from the trivial anxieties and pervasive societal pressures inherent in urban existence. However, observing Demetrios in his present state, as he meticulously contemplated the optimal location for establishing his rudimentary shelter for the inaugural night, one surmised that such a state of philosophical resignation remained a distant prospect for him. The observer accompanies Demetrios to one of the island's sparse natural caverns, a modest indentation within the rock face, strategically oriented eastward towards the nascent dawn. While far from providing luxurious comfort, its floor comprised of unyielding, irregular stone, and its ceiling sufficiently cramped to necessitate constant stooping, it nonetheless offered invaluable shelter from the relentless assaults of wind and rain. Crucially, its configuration rendered it a formidable position, capable of being defended should the island's unruly caprines manifest aggression, or if other unforeseen perils were to emerge from the desolate landscape. The consignment of provisions he had painstakingly transported from the vessel encompassed the scant necessities for sheer survival: a modest quantity of grain, some dehydrated piscine fare, a receptacle for water, a bladed implement, a protective mantle, and a handful of other hastily assembled implements. These provisions, if judiciously conserved and meticulously rationed, might sustain him for a period of several weeks. Subsequent to their depletion, his existence would become solely reliant upon the scarce bounty the island itself could yield, coupled with whatever sustenance he might ingeniously procure from the surrounding aquatic environment. The observer notes his deliberate actions as Demetrios partakes in his inaugural repast in exile, a meager serving of grain commingled with water, subtly imparted with the essence of a small quantity of dried fish. Though quantitatively insubstantial, he consumes it with methodical slowness, intent on prolonging its duration. Already, he is internalizing one of the fundamental tenets of survival. Every resource must be meticulously preserved. Absolutely nothing can be squandered. Consequently, each choice pertaining to consumption becomes an existential calculus, directly correlating to the potential longevity of his solitary existence. As the afternoon gracefully transitions into twilight, the observer discerns the profound stillness that descends upon the island. An absolute absence of anthropogenic sounds pervades the air. No resonant voices, no rhythmic rumbling of cartwheels upon ancient stone, no percussive clangor emanating from bustling workshops, no harmonious melodies wafting from domestic dwellings. The silence is so absolute that one's own heartbeat, one's own measured respirations, become distinctly audible. For an individual accustomed to the ceaseless cacophony of vibrant urban life, this unadulterated quietude must undoubtedly feel unsettling in its vastness. Demetrios endeavors to engage his intellect by meticulously devising strategies for survival. He surveys the immediate environs of his cavernous refuge, assiduously amassing stones that could potentially serve to ameliorate the structural integrity of his shelter. He scrutinizes the indigenous flora, striving to discern which plants might possess culinary or utilitarian applications. Furthermore, he reconnoiters the littoral zone, searching for optimal locations for angling or for gathering shellfish and crustaceans. Yet, visible evidence suggests that his true engagement is absent from these practical activities. His consciousness remains profoundly preoccupied with Athens, still grappling with the enormity of the life he has irrevocably forfeited. The inaugural nocturnal period invariably proves the most arduous. From a vantage point outside the cavern, the observer notes Demetrios, enveloped in his mantle, gazing intently at the diminutive flame he has painstakingly nurtured into continued existence. Intermittently, he articulates words aloud, as if addressing a non-existent interlocutor, perhaps his spouse, a cherished compatriot, or even himself. So potent is the inherent human imperative for conversational exchange that the crushing weight of exile compels individuals to engage in profound dialogues with phantasmic companions. As the days slowly unfold, the observer discerns the incremental metamorphosis that the state of exile invariably precipitates. Demetrios establishes habitual practices, inspecting his meager blaze each morning, foraging for sustenance, diligently upkeeping his rudimentary refuge, and endeavoring to chronicle the passage of time by incising marks upon a fragment of wood. While these activities undoubtedly impart order and predictability to his solitary days, they simultaneously underscore the profound divergence of this existence from the opulent, intricate communal life he had once intimately known. On certain days, he ascends to the island's most elevated promontory, gazing across the expansive water towards the distant horizon, where Athens, his former home, remained imperceptible beyond the terrestrial curvature. One could almost visualize him striving to conjure images of the events unfolding there. What fervent political discourse transpired within the assembly? What compelling dramas were being staged in the grand theater? What profound intellectual colloquies engaged the minds within the gymnasia? In this profound isolation, he had, in essence, transformed into a spectral presence, haunting and obsessing over his own irrevocably altered former life. The pervasive solitude similarly impacts his physiognomy. His hair elongates and assumes an untamed aspect. His garments grow increasingly threadbare and mended, bearing the marks of ceaseless wear. His skin's pigmentation deepens, a testament to unremitting solar exposure. Progressively, he begins to resemble less a distinguished Athenian denizen and more a primeval figure, perhaps a reclusive anchorite or a feral individual, someone who subsists precariously at the periphery of conventional human society. Nevertheless, interspersed within this austere existence are also moments of unanticipated allure. The observer notes his discovery of a diminutive intertidal basin, teeming with vibrantly hued sea anemones and minute aquatic fauna. He devotes an hour solely to scrutinizing their delicate undulations, utterly captivated by this intricate subaquatic microcosm. It represents a species of profound awe, one that the frenzied urban routine of his former life had never afforded him the opportunity to experience. As winter draws nigh, marking his inaugural cold season in exile, the observer beholds him undertaking preparations with the scrupulous diligence of an individual who comprehends that his very sustenance hinges upon an unwavering attention to detail. He assiduously collects desiccated marine algae for fuel, works to mend and fortify his rudimentary shelter, and endeavors to conserve whatever meager foodstuffs he can procure. While these practical tasks serve to occupy his hands, one can discern in his eyes the perpetual cognizance that he is utterly solitary in this arduous undertaking. Periodically, he engages in discourse with the island's caprine inhabitants, hailing them as if they were venerable companions. "Good morning, Socrates," he might utter to an especially hoary male goat. "What profound wisdom do you impart upon me this day?" It strikes one as simultaneously poignant and sorrowful, this desperate, futile endeavor to forge social interaction with creatures inherently incapable of meaningful reciprocation. The nocturnal hours persist as the most challenging period. The observer watches him reposing within his cave, hearkening to the mournful lament of the wind and the ceaseless rhythm of the waves, gazing fixedly at the celestial bodies discernible through the entrance. He has now mastered the entirety of the astral groupings, can accurately forecast meteorological phenomena from subtle cloud formations, and can ascertain the temporal progression by the precise position of the lunar orb. While such acquired skills would undoubtedly have elicited admiration from his peers back in Athens, here he remains utterly devoid of an appreciative audience. Prior to departing from this desolate isle, the observer contemplates how exile to such insular outposts perhaps epitomized the most merciless form of sanction conceived by the ancient Greeks. Its cruelty stemmed not from its brutality, but from its profoundly atomizing nature. It divested an individual not merely of their autonomy or material ease, but of their intrinsic humanity as gregarious entities. Whether Demetrios will endure, whether he will be extricated from his predicament, or whether he will ultimately discover tranquility amidst his isolation. These profound questions linger in the saline atmosphere like an ephemeral morning mist, unresolved and potentially inscrutable. Having observed the utter sequestration imposed by island exile, the observer is now transported to a markedly divergent milieu, where chastisement functions not solely as a penalty, but as a didactic instrument. One finds oneself positioned within the gymnasium of ancient Athens, inhaling the commingled aromas of unctuous olive oil, human perspiration, and the supple hide tautly stretched across wooden frames, left to dry beneath the afternoon sun. This revered sanctum is where nascent physiques are honed and budding intellects are cultivated, frequently through rigorous methodologies that might appear severe by contemporary sensibilities. Indeed, the gymnasium constitutes more than a mere venue for corporeal exertion. It stands as a foundational pillar of Hellenic pedagogy, a place where adolescents ranging from 12 to 18 years of age dedicate their days to assimilating the principles of exemplary citizenship, rigorous bodily conditioning, the harmonious arts, intricate mathematics, profound literary studies, and metaphysical inquiry, all transpire within these precincts, diligently overseen by pedagogues who firmly espouse the conviction that the discipline of the physique and the discipline of the intellect are inextricably interconnected. One observes a contingent of 15-year-old boys engaging in rigorous grappling exercises under the tutelage of Philippos, a distinguished Olympian whose indelibly marked hands and weathered countenance eloquently attest to decades of competitive combat. The youths are unclothed, their physiques glistening with the unction of olive oil, which is primarily intended to safeguard their epidermis during the arduous embraces of wrestling, yet simultaneously renders them more elusive to grasp. It presents a tangible manifestation of biomechanical principles that would undoubtedly elicit approbation from Archimedes himself. It becomes apparent that one particular youth, named Nicias, struggles to achieve mastery over a specific throwing maneuver. He has attempted the action on 6 separate occasions thus far, and each instance has seen his adversary effortlessly neutralize the move, subsequently sending Nicias sprawling to the mat. One can discern the mounting exasperation etched upon the young man's countenance. Evidently, Philippos perceives this developing tension as well, for he promptly commands a cessation of the drills. The reason for this interruption was Nicias's abrupt call for a cessation of the practice session. "Nicias," the instructor declared, his voice resonating with clarity throughout the vast gymnasium, "you are allowing rage to cloud your judgment, instead of engaging your intellect. When you permit raw emotion to dictate your physical responses, you inevitably become easily anticipated. Your adversary can discern your next move even before you commence it." This pointed admonition was abruptly punctuated by the whistling of air and the crisp report of leather against flesh. The whip wielded by Philippos, a slender thong of hide affixed to a wooden handle, was meticulously crafted not to inflict genuine injury, but rather to deliver a sharp, momentary sting. Nevertheless, its psychological resonance proved profound. Every single boy within the spacious confines of the gymnasium immediately paused his endeavors, compelled to listen intently upon hearing that unmistakable auditory cue. It served as a potent affirmation that the pursuit of excellence demands rigorous self-control, and that such discipline occasionally necessitates enduring a degree of physical discomfort. The observer trails Nicias as he subsequently relocates to another sector of the gymnasium, an area where young men are engaged in the practice of discus throwing. His shoulder now bears a visible crimson mark from the instructor's whip, yet he betrays no discernible sign of resentment or vexation regarding it. Indeed, if anything, he exhibits a heightened concentration, appearing significantly more intent than he had been during the preceding wrestling lesson. It was evident that the momentary pain of the correction had sharpened his mental acuity in a manner that mere oral directives had proven incapable of achieving. This specific discus area is distinctly delineated by stout wooden stakes implanted into the earth at precise predetermined distances, collectively forming a sector resembling an open fan, designated as the throwing field. Young men alternately propel the substantial bronze projectiles, their individual techniques meticulously observed by Aristocles, a venerable teacher whose personal competitive career had concluded many years prior, yet whose discerning gaze for flawless execution had not diminished in the slightest. He, too, carries a whip, although his instrument is noticeably more compact and less substantial than the one Philippos employs for wrestling instruction. The observer witnesses a youth named Cleomenes approach the throwing line, It is patently evident that he is inexperienced in this particular discipline. His preparatory posture is incorrect, and his hold upon the bronze disc appears tentative. When he ultimately releases the implement, the disc strays significantly from its designated mark, veering dangerously wide and narrowly missing a cluster of students engaged in javelin practice nearby. Aristocles expresses his disapproval with a shake of his head and then gestures for Cleomenes to approach him. Before you attempt to propel another discus, the instructor states softly, you must first grasp a fundamental principle concerning accuracy. Extend your hand. Cleomenes complies, offering his right hand, open and upward-facing. Aristocles then delivers 2 measured strokes with his whip across the boy's palm. The force is insufficient to lacerate the epidermis, yet it is sufficiently impactful to elicit a tearful response from the youth. Now you will retain the imperative to consider your objective before you release the disc. Physical discomfort, I assure you, serves as an unparalleled instructor of focus. The other young men observe this corrective action, devoid of any discernible astonishment or commiseration. Physical discipline, it is understood, constitutes an integral component of scholastic training within the gymnasium, no less significant than mastering the computation of geometric proportions or committing epic verses from Homer to memory. They comprehend that their mentors are not acting out of malice or deliberate cruelty. Rather, they are assiduously forging these adolescents for existences where an absence of self-control might lead to dire repercussions. The observer then proceeds to the sector designated for older boys, adolescents approaching manhood, aged 17 and 18, who are engaged in the rigorous practice of pancration. This particular discipline is a pugilistic art amalgamating grappling and percussive methods. This is undeniably a gravely earnest undertaking. Many of these young men will shortly assume their civic duties, including military service, and the competencies acquired in this arena could dictate their survival in future armed conflicts. The instructor presiding over this area is Lycaron, a seasoned veteran who suffered the amputation of 2 digits in a battle against the Persians 2 decades prior. His pedagogical approach is notably more rigorous than what was observed with the younger boys. When a student commits an error potentially leading to mortal consequences in actual warfare, Lycaron does not hesitate to swiftly employ his whip to indelibly impress the instruction. The observer watches as 2 young men, Alexios and Damon, engage in a vigorous sparring session beneath Lycaron's watchful eye. Alexios endeavors a sophisticated leg takedown maneuver, but in the execution, he inadvertently exposes himself defensively. Damon, rather than seizing this opportune moment to exploit the vulnerability, falters, possibly due to a bond of camaraderie, or perhaps from an insufficient predatory drive. Lycaron instantly commands a cessation of the bout. Damon, Lycaron articulated, on the battlefield, indecision proves fatal. Your comrade's error presented an opportunity, and you utterly neglected to capitalize upon it. The lash snapped sharply across Damon's spine. And Alexios, he continued, turning his attention to the second boy, elaborate maneuvers are rendered futile if they expose you to peril. You would undoubtedly be deceased presently had Damon possessed the mindset of a combatant rather than a mere youth. The lash also connected with Alexios, but this corporeal admonishment was promptly succeeded by comprehensive guidance. Lycaron demonstrated to both boys the precise actions they ought to have executed. How Alexios could have preserved his defensive posture throughout the leg sweep, and how Damon could have effectively exploited his adversary's misstep. The whip inflicts a momentary sting, yet the subsequent elucidation of principles helps guarantee the error will not recur. The observer discerns that the application of the whip differs considerably, contingent upon both the specific mentor and the character of the transgression. Philippos, when teaching wrestling, employs it principally for the rectification of demeanor and concentration. Aristocles, instructing discus throwers, utilizes it to solidify teachings concerning accuracy and security. Lycuron, conversely, deploys it in instances where errors might precipitate fatalities on the field of combat. It becomes clear that every mentor within the gymnasium has cultivated a unique doctrine regarding the appropriate timing and context for corporeal correction. Beyond the physical training, the educational complex additionally encompasses dedicated zones for scholarly pursuits, and the observer is keen to ascertain if the lash holds any role in those lessons as well. He accompanies a contingent of youths to a sheltered colonnade, where they occupy simple wooden seats before a preceptor known as Hermippos. This instructor is currently guiding them through the intricacies of geometric proofs, employing figures etched directly into the sandy ground as visual aids. The mathematical lesson commences with a hushed demeanor, with the boys individually elucidating various stages in the geometric proof. However, when a student named Thrasymachos provides an erroneous response and subsequently engages in obstinate contention with the instructor, rather than conceding his miscalculation, Hermippos reaches for a slender switch in lieu of a full lash. Thrasymachos. Hermippos articulates with measured calm. Mathematics is indifferent to your personal viewpoint or your self-importance. The demonstration is either valid or it is not. Contending with empirical truth constitutes a fruitless expenditure of collective effort. He delivers a light tap to the youth's hand with the rod, not with harshness, but with sufficient emphasis to convey the intended message. Now, re-examine the schematic once more and identify the flaw in your deduction. The intervention proves effective. Thrasymachos scrutinizes the intricate geometric configurations drawn in the sand, meticulously delineates the interconnections among various components, and ultimately pinpoints his miscalculation. The momentary discomfort from the rod had aided him in relinquishing his vanity and concentrating solely on the core issue at hand. In this instance, corporeal correction, when administered with discernment, had demonstrably advanced the pursuit of knowledge. With the advance of the afternoon hours, the observer notes how the diverse modalities of discipline employed across the gymnasium engender distinct ambient qualities in its various sections. The wrestling area, for example, possesses a palpable fervor derived from the certainty that inadequate execution will be promptly and physically rectified. Conversely, the mathematical instruction area maintains a contemplative ambience, wherein students skillfully navigate intellectual inquiry alongside an acute cognizance that persistent inaccuracies bear repercussions. The observer settles upon a stone plinth near the gymnasium's central courtyard, witnessing the sun's descent as its rays angle lower through the imposing pillars. The boys are in the process of concluding their daily instruction, cleansing their bodies using strigils, arcuate metallic implements designed to divest the skin of residual oil, perspiration, and particulate matter. While some exhibit subtle crimson traces from the day's corrections, their dialogues are notably spirited and jovial. The most salient impression gleaned from this educational paradigm is the profound degree to which corporeal correction is interwoven into the pedagogical process. The whip and rod, it becomes clear, do not function as retribution born of vengeance or malevolence. Instead, they are conceived as pedagogical instruments, specifically fashioned to forge instantaneous, indelible connections between errors and their resultant repercussions. The young men, for their part, appear to embrace this as an inherent component of their scholastic journey, finding it no more disagreeable than the arduous task of committing poetic verses to memory or diligently practicing harmonic sequences. One of the older boys, in the process of departing the training facility, pauses to bind a minor linen strip around a contusion on his forelimb. A companion inquires concerning its origin, and the youth offers a casual shrug. Lycuron impressed upon me the necessity of maintaining my defensive posture during instruction in bladed weapon avoidance, he explains. I shall not repeat that particular oversight. There is an absence of acrimony in his tone, merely the pragmatic acknowledgement of an individual who comprehends that the acquisition of knowledge occasionally entails discomfort. With the advent of dusk and the gradual emptying of the gymnasium, the observer ponders the stark divergence of this pedagogical methodology from contemporary educational expectations. The Hellenic conviction that corporeal correction could fortify moral fiber and enhance cognitive assimilation appears austere to present-day sensitivities. Yet, it was fundamentally predicated upon their profound belief that intellect and physique constituted indivisible constituents of human maturation and holistic individual growth. The mentors, notwithstanding their employment of lashes and switches, demonstrably harbor genuine concern for their charges. This solicitude is evident in their consistent practice of complementing correction with comprehensive guidance, in their readiness to personally illustrate complex maneuvers, and in their meticulous observation of each youth's unique aptitudes and deficiencies. The corporeal stricture, therefore, is intrinsically woven into bonds of authentic guidance and tutelage, rather than being an act of detached punishment. As the observer prepares for repose this evening, one might contemplate the intricate interplay between the acquisition of knowledge and the experience of unease. The Hellenes were convinced that both the corporeal and the intellectual faculties necessitated rigorous challenge and intentional propulsion beyond their accustomed boundaries for optimal maturation and development. Irrespective of whether this conviction was sagacious or erroneous, it undeniably fostered a citizenry that not only embraced self-control and discipline, but also exhibited unwavering dedication to superlative achievement in both athletic prowess and scholarly endeavors, in both physical and intellectual pursuits. After observing the brutal crack of whips in the gymnasium, one might find themselves transported to a setting where ultimate retribution is administered, yet paradoxically, in the most hushed and understated manner imaginable. One is positioned within a modest, stone-walled chamber inside the state prison of Athens on a balmy afternoon in 399 BC, observing the unfolding of what is perhaps the most renowned execution in the annals of Western philosophy. This event transpires not with overt drama or violent confrontation, but through a series of thoughtful exchanges and an air of profound inquiry. Socrates, a venerable figure of 70 years, stood on the precipice of consuming a draught of poisonous hemlock, having been condemned by an Athenian jury on charges of impiety and the corruption of the city's youth. These accusations were widely perceived as somewhat nebulous and ill-defined, a point of contention noted by numerous observers. Yet the prescribed penalty was unequivocally explicit: death by hemlock. This method represented the conventional means of execution for citizens deemed undeserving of a more valorous demise on the battlefield, a standard practice of the era. The atmosphere within the room was remarkably serene, a stark contrast to the gravity of an impending death. The gentle afternoon sunlight filtered through a diminutive window, casting luminous shafts that highlighted motes of dust dancing idly in the air. Socrates occupied a plain wooden bench, encircled by a retinue of devoted friends and pupils who had assembled to share his concluding hours. Their countenances betrayed a profound sorrow, yet also a discernible sense of fascination, as they bore witness to an experience unparalleled in their collective existence. What rendered this particular execution so extraordinarily atypical was not the chosen method. Indeed, a multitude of Athenians had previously succumbed to hemlock, but rather the singularly composed demeanor of the condemned individual. Socrates appeared almost eager to partake of the poison, not out of a desire for self-annihilation, but from a genuine and profound curiosity regarding the nature of what lay beyond. For him, death represented the ultimate enigma, and the exploration of unknowns had consistently been his preferred domain of intellectual investigation. One observes as the executioner a composed and highly skilled professional who regarded his duties as a refined craft, demanding both precision and expertise, meticulously prepared the hemlock concoction. Having performed this grim task on countless prior occasions, he possessed an intimate knowledge of the precise quantity of the pulverized plant to blend with wine, ensuring the mixture's potency for a swift efficacy, yet calibrated so as to avert any gratuitous suffering on the part of the condemned. From a botanical perspective, the hemlock plant itself possessed intriguing characteristics. Its appearance bore a superficial resemblance to parsley, a similarity that had, throughout history, tragically resulted in numerous accidental poisonings. However, its physiological effects were dramatically divergent, and the active compounds, primarily choline, exerted their influence by progressively incapacitating the nervous system, commencing with the peripheral extremities and gradually advancing inward toward the vital organs. The cessation of life ultimately occurred when this paralyzing effect reached the lungs and diaphragm, rendering respiration impossible. Socrates addressed the executioner with an intellectual eagerness identical to that which he might apply to a discourse on advanced mathematics or intricate ethical dilemmas. "How much time does this process typically require?" he inquired. "Will I retain my consciousness throughout? Is there any accompanying discomfort?" The executioner, perhaps taken aback by such clinical detachment from a man facing his final moments, responded to each query with comprehensive and professional clarity. "Most individuals experience a loss of sensation in their feet within a few minutes," the executioner elucidated, while diligently stirring the mixture. "The numbness then progressively ascends. You should remain fully aware until the concluding stages, but significant pain is rarely a factor. It is more a sensation of increasing coldness and heaviness. Some individuals even drift into slumber before the final breath." The discourse within the chamber persisted, maintaining an air akin to a routine social gathering rather than a solemn execution. Socrates engaged in profound philosophical discussions with his companions, positing intricate questions concerning the essence of the soul, and musing speculatively on whether death might constitute a dreamless repose or an epic voyage to a realm where he could converse with the illustrious thinkers of antiquity. His profound inquisitiveness concerning death effectively supplanted any apprehension he might otherwise have harbored. One cannot help but notice the executioner's comportment in his role. He exhibited no trace of cruelty or vindictiveness. Rather, he functioned purely as a dedicated craftsman fulfilling his obligations. He meticulously measured the hemlock, rigorously assessed the mixture's consistency, and ensured that every aspect of the preparation was impeccably executed. A discernible professional dignity permeated his every movement, as if he implicitly comprehended that the manner of a person's death held intrinsic significance, even when that individual had been condemned by the authority of the state. When the appointed moment arrived for Socrates to partake of the poison, he accepted the cup without the slightest hesitation. His companions, who had until then been weeping softly, observed his remarkably composed demeanor. "Gentlemen," he pronounced, surveying the assembled company, "my entire existence has been dedicated to the rigorous examination of how to live virtuously. Now, I am afforded the singular opportunity to investigate how to die virtuously. This, in essence, is merely the subsequent phase of my lifelong inquiry." The hemlock concoction possessed a distinctly bitter flavor, a detail upon which Socrates commented with the same analytical precision he might bestow upon a novel vintage of wine. He drained the cup entirely, returned it to the executioner, and then commenced to perambulate the modest room, articulating the sensations he experienced. It was akin to a scientific experiment conducted upon his own person, accompanied by a continuous, lucid commentary for the enlightenment of his observers. "My feet are growing cold," he declared after a few minutes, "and heavy as though they belonged to another individual." He continued his perambulation until the creeping sensation ascended to his calves, whereupon he settled onto the bench and extended his legs. The executioner, with professional diligence, periodically assessed Socrates' reflexes by pinching his feet and legs, meticulously monitoring the advancement of the paralysis. The truly extraordinary aspect of this execution lay in its profoundly educational nature. Socrates masterfully transmuted his death into a compelling lesson on courage, intellectual curiosity, and the appropriate disposition toward the unfathomable unknown. His friends, initially overwhelmed by profound sorrow, found themselves drawn into the philosophical exploration of the very process of dying. The room was transformed into a veritable classroom, where the ultimate subject matter was being investigated and elucidated in real time. As the paralysis gradually extended to his thighs and subsequently his abdomen, Socrates' voice retained its clarity and his intellect remained remarkably incisive. He persisted in posing questions regarding the physical sensations he experienced, deliberating on the profound philosophical implications of consciousness progressively departing from the corporeal form, and pondering whether his companions could derive any valuable insights from observing this unfolding process. The executioner, who had undoubtedly supervised hundreds of hemlock-induced deaths, appeared genuinely impressed by Socrates' remarkable composure and his intellectual engagement with the experience. Most individuals spend their final moments consumed by fear or profound regret, he remarked quietly to one of Socrates' friends. This man approaches dying as if he were solving an intricate mathematical problem. It is truly an uncommon spectacle. One observes as Socrates' respiration grew increasingly labored. The paralysis was now ascending into his chest, yet his mind remained acutely active. He recounted a dream from the preceding night, in which a beautiful woman had informed him that he would reach the fertile Pythia in 3 days, an allusion to a line from Homer, which he interpreted as signifying his arrival at whatever destination awaited the departed. The afternoon light was now receding, casting elongated shadows across the stone floor. Socrates then requested of his friend Crito to remember to offer a sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepius, the deity of healing. This final request struck many as enigmatic. Perhaps he intended to convey that death itself constituted a form of healing, a definitive remedy for the affliction of life. Or perhaps he was articulating a jest whose profound meaning was accessible only to him. As his breathing became increasingly arduous, Socrates drew a cloth over his face. Yet, a moment later, he uncovered it to articulate one final observation. "Crito, I truly believe my feet are cold now." Is this, then, the sensation of the very end? These were his concluding utterances, delivered not as a dramatic valedictory declaration, but as yet another piece of empirical data in his lifelong, relentless investigation into the entirety of human experience. The executioner diligently verified for any signs of respiration, for a pulse, for any lingering indications of life. Detecting none, he respectfully closed Socrates' eyes and gently arranged his body on the bench. The eminent questioner had at last encountered a question he could no longer articulate, though perhaps in that very moment he had also discovered the ultimate answer that had eluded him throughout his 70 years of profound inquiry. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the subdued weeping of his grieving companions. Yet, even amidst their sorrow, there permeated a sense that they had been privileged witnesses to something truly extraordinary. Not merely a death, but a profound demonstration of how a life dedicated to philosophy might conclude, exhibiting the same intellectual fortitude that had characterized its entire trajectory. Socrates had transformed his execution into his final, and arguably his most profound, lesson. As one remains seated in the encroaching gloom of the prison cell, one reflects on the stark contrast between this execution and the more theatrical public punishments witnessed elsewhere. There were no throngs of onlookers, no grand spectacle, no deliberate attempt to humiliate or instill terror. Only a quiet chamber where a man confronted his demise with an unwavering curiosity, transforming his final moments into an ultimate investigation of life's profoundest mystery. The hemlock had now completed its inexorable work. Socrates lay motionless on the bench, appearing almost as if he were in a deep slumber rather than having departed this life. His companions prepared to transport his body home for burial, yet their movements were slow and deliberate, as if reluctant to conclude this final gathering with their revered teacher. On this day, they had absorbed an invaluable lesson about courage, about the nature of death, and about the profound possibility of confronting the unknown with intellectual exhilaration rather than paralyzing fear. Tonight, as one prepares for rest, one might find oneself contemplating the peculiar mercy inherent in hemlock as an execution method. It had permitted Socrates to remain intrinsically himself, to continue his profound thinking, his teaching, and his relentless questioning until his very last breath. In a world that frequently transformed punishment into public spectacle, Athens had, for its citizens, reserved a manner of dying that preserved their inherent dignity even in their concluding moments. The profound contemplation of Socrates' dignified demise gives way to a starkly contrasting reality. The brutal pragmatism of maritime discipline. On the pitching deck of a Hellenic trireme, amidst the relentless rise and fall dictated by the Mediterranean's vast undulations, the observer is enveloped by the synchronized cadence of 170 oars, slicing through the cerulean expanse. Here, the very essence of order transcended mere judicial retribution or didactic instruction. It represented the foundational imperative for collective endurance within one of antiquity's most perilous operational environments, where life and death were often separated by a single error. This formidable vessel, a true testament to ancient naval engineering, stretched almost 120 feet in length, yet maintained a slender 18-foot beam, meticulously crafted for unparalleled velocity and devastating ramming capability, rather than any semblance of onboard ease or accommodation. Within its narrow hull, 3 distinct tiers of oarsmen occupied their unyielding wooden benches, each individual entrusted with the precise manipulation of a solitary oar. This intricate system demanded absolute, flawless synchronicity among all crew members, for even the slightest miscalculation in timing could catastrophically disrupt the ship's entire operational rhythm, rendering it vulnerable and potentially incapacitated amidst the fury of a naval engagement or the wrath of a tempestuous gale. The observer's gaze is drawn to the ship's commander, a seasoned and weather-beaten mariner named Xenophon, distinct from the celebrated historian, yet sharing the same nomenclature, as he confronts an immediate predicament jeopardizing the vessel's critical operational efficacy. A particular oarsman, identified as Bias, had succumbed to excessive indulgence in intoxicating beverages during his nocturnal watch, rendering him incapable of sustaining the requisite precise timing with his assigned oar. His lamentably erratic and disjointed strokes were demonstrably compromising the harmonious efforts of the entire portside contingent, undermining the collective propulsion. The administration of naval discipline aboard a Greek warship was characterized by its unhesitating swiftness and its inherently public nature. Commander Xenophon, bypassing any semblance of formal inquiry or protracted deliberation concerning an appropriate punitive measure, issued a direct and unequivocal command. Bias was to be bound securely to the principal mast, destined to remain there for the entire duration of the day, serving as a stark, tangible admonition to his fellow oarsmen. Without delay, 2 stalwart sailors moved to execute the order, firmly securing the man's wrists with robust rope and fastening him tightly against the towering wooden column that proudly supported the ship's expansive square sail. While seemingly rudimentary in its execution, the punitive measure exacted a profoundly comprehensive array of consequences. Bias found himself utterly unable to seek refuge from the relentless solar assault, as the sun's unforgiving rays bore down mercilessly upon the exposed expanse of the deck. Denied any possibility of sitting or reclining, he was held rigidly upright by the constricting ropes against the unyielding mast. Furthermore, he was forcibly excluded from the collective labor that imbued shipboard existence with its fundamental purpose and rhythmic pulse. Most significantly, he could not escape the palpable disapproval and murmured commentary emanating from his shipmates, who possessed an acute awareness that his individual lapse in discipline imperiled the collective safety and survival of every soul on board. A perceptible transformation in the behavior of the other oarsmen became evident as they observed their crewmates' predicament, bound to the mast. Their individual oar strokes acquired a newfound precision, and their responsiveness to commands became markedly more instantaneous. The visible spectacle of punishment being exacted served as a potent reinforcement of the crucial principle that personal transgressions held dire, collective ramifications in the unforgiving maritime domain. In an environment where the vessel might be called upon at any moment to outmaneuver swift pirate ships or deliver a decisive ramming blow against an adversary, there existed absolutely no margin for the sort of relaxed insubordination that might conceivably find a degree of forbearance on terra firma. With the inexorable advance of the morning hours, the discernible physical toll of the massed punishment on Bias became increasingly apparent. The brilliant sunlight, intensifying as it glinted off the shimmering water and the expansive white sail, generated an oppressive glare that compelled him to narrow his eyes and instinctively avert his gaze. The unyielding rope encircling his wrists began to chafe and abrade his skin whenever he attempted even the slightest alteration of his constrained posture. His lower limbs, deprived of any capacity for flexion or free movement, inevitably started to seize with excruciating cramps, a direct consequence of hours spent in an unvarying, upright stance. Yet, it was arguably the psychological repercussions that eclipsed the immediate physical discomfort. Bias was compelled to endure the sight of his own rowing bench remaining conspicuously vacant, while his shipmates diligently toiled, a constant visual testament to his dereliction. He could distinctly perceive how his enforced absence subtly but surely compromised the vessel's optimal operational efficiency. The port side, now manned by 56 oarsmen instead of its full complement of 57, generated a subtle yet perceptible hydrodynamic imbalance in the ship's passage through the water. Thus, his punishment transcended mere individual agony. It served as an unremitting, visceral admonition that he had profoundly disappointed and failed those with whom he shared the arduous journey. Unperturbed by the singular tableau of the bound man, the ship's intricate daily routine proceeded without interruption. Oarsmen, in an organized rotation, availed themselves of their designated rest periods, allowing their strained arms and weary backs a brief respite. The astute sailing master diligently fine-tuned the rigging, expertly manipulating the sails to harness the capricious shifts in the wind's direction. Simultaneously, the vigilant helmsman executed nuanced adjustments to maintain the vessel's unwavering trajectory. Amidst this ceaseless activity, Bias remained a desolate, unmoving figure against the mast, an eloquent and living embodiment of the severe consequences that invariably befell any individual who dared to fracture the rigorous discipline essential for the sustained, vital functioning of a warship. Drawing nearer, the observer discerns the hushed exchanges circulating among the crew members. A faction of the men expressed a degree of empathy for Bias, acknowledging their own susceptibility to the allure of excessive drink during the protracted and monotonous stretches of sea voyages, and comprehending the profound ennui and psychological strain that could precipitate regrettable choices. Conversely, another segment evinced less leniency, pointedly emphasizing that the decisive outcomes of naval engagements were frequently determined by infinitesimal margins, often measured in mere seconds, thereby underscoring the absolute imperative for every single oarsman to embody unwavering dependability when the ship's operational demands necessitated peak velocity. A venerable mariner named Cleander, a man whose 2 decades of arduous service aboard triremes had etched wisdom into his countenance, elucidated the underlying philosophy of massed punishment to a more junior crew member. With practiced hands, he meticulously checked the tautness of a rope as he spoke, articulating a profound distinction. On solid ground, the missteps of an individual largely inflict damage upon himself alone. However, upon the vast and unforgiving sea, the singular failure of one person possesses the catastrophic potential to doom the entire vessel. The stark spectacle of the mast, in its silent severity, imparts this critical lesson with far greater efficacy than any verbose discourse or protracted sermon could ever hope to achieve. With the sun's ascent to its zenith, the ship's deck transformed into an oppressively hot expanse. The exposed bronze fittings became searing to the touch, compelling even the most seasoned sailors to desperately seek out any available sliver of shade. Bias, however, remained rigidly bound against the mast, utterly deprived of any respite from the relentless thermal assault. Perspiration streamed down his face, saturating his tunic, yet he was denied access to water, save for the meager, carefully measured allowances granted by Xenophon, just enough to stave off the ultimate extremity of death, but certainly insufficient to alleviate the profound discomfort of his ordeal. A discerning observer would note the meticulous calibration underlying the punishment. Xenophon, with a calculated vigilance, personally monitored Bias's condition approximately every hour, assiduously ensuring that the man was not confronting any immediate life-threatening peril. Concurrently, these checks served to guarantee that the intended lesson retained its potent efficacy. The rationale was clear. If the punitive measure proved excessively lenient, it would utterly fail to dissuade future acts of misconduct. Conversely, if its severity verged on the extreme, it risked inflicting irreparable harm upon a crew member, a man whose full capabilities might be crucially required when the vessel inevitably confronted genuine life-or-death emergencies. The afternoon brought with it a sudden and violent squall, heralded by ominous dark clouds and torrential driving rain, a meteorological onslaught that rigorously tested the crew's collective skill and unwavering teamwork. The oarsmen were compelled to dramatically accelerate their stroke rate, exerting immense effort to maintain forward momentum against the formidable resistance of the wind and surging waves. Simultaneously, the sailing master and his diligent assistants wrestled desperately to reef the expansive sail, striving to secure it before its fabric could be shredded by the tempest's fury. Every single individual aboard the ship was engaged in urgent, critical labor. Every man, that is, except Bias, who could only observe from his fixed position at the mast, a helpless spectator as his shipmates valiantly battled the storm without his contribution. The profound isolation inherent in massed punishment became most acutely agonizing during such life-threatening emergencies. While every other soul actively contributed to the vessel's struggle for survival, the bound man was reduced to a mere passive observer of his own impending destiny. Should the ship succumb to the storm's wrath and founder, he would undoubtedly meet the same watery grave as everyone else. Yet he had been deliberately incapacitated, prevented from playing any part in averting that very outcome. This particular facet of the punishment inexorably forced him to confront his absolute reliance on the very crew he had so conspicuously failed through his egregious misconduct. As the sudden squall gradually receded and the ship's routine navigation resumed, the observer detected Bias speaking in hushed tones to himself. His murmured words were a mixture of fervent prayers directed to Poseidon for the vessel's continued safety, heartfelt apologies addressed to shipmates too distant to possibly overhear, and solemn vows to amend his conduct should he be granted a subsequent opportunity. This enforced period of profound isolation had evidently afforded him ample time for deep introspection, prompting a comprehensive re-evaluation of his behavior and a keen understanding of its far-reaching consequences. A level of self-awareness that might not have been attained through the mere application of immediate physical retribution alone. The ship's cook, a pragmatic individual named Demetrius, conscientiously set aside a meager portion of the evening repast specifically for Bias. It was not a generous serving, but precisely enough to sustain his life. The fare itself was cold and comprised the least desirable remnants from the communal cooking pot. Yet its very provision represented a form of reluctant, albeit grudging solicitude for a crew member who, despite his severe punishment, remained an integral, albeit temporarily disgraced, component of the ship's tightly knit community. As twilight descended and the Mediterranean firmament transitioned into a breathtaking palette of purple and orange hues, Xenophon at last issued the command for Bias to be released from the mast. The man's legs, severely weakened from an entire day spent in an unyielding, static posture, could barely sustain his weight, and his wrists bore raw, abraded marks where the ropes had constricted his skin. Nevertheless, he was unequivocally alive, fully conscious, and at least for the present moment, appeared to be genuinely chastened and reformed. The ritual of his untying was notably succinct and devoid of any accompanying oratorical pronouncements. Two sailors swiftly severed the confining ropes, then gently assisted Bias in his faltering walk back to his designated bench, offering him a water jar from which he slowly and gratefully drank. The remaining oarsmen observed this entire procedure with a keen, yet dispassionate interest, refraining from offering any expressions of sympathy or congratulations. The immediate punishment had concluded, but it was implicitly understood that Bias would henceforth be required to demonstrate through his future conduct that he had indeed internalized its harsh, indelible lessons. It became evident that Bias's reintegration into his customary duties would not be an instantaneous affair. He was afforded the remainder of the evening for recuperation, yet by the dawn of the following day, he would be expected to return to his oar, meticulously upholding the identical standards of timing and precision demanded of every other oarsman. While the physical punishment itself was finite and temporary, its profound ramifications upon his standing within the crew and the intricate web of his interpersonal relationships were destined to endure for a considerably longer duration. As the vessel gracefully settled into its nocturnal rhythms, the anchor securely dropped, watches meticulously assigned, and the cooking fires carefully managed to prevent any errant sparks, the observer's thoughts turned to a profound contemplation of how naval punitive measures diverged fundamentally from the other manifestations of justice previously witnessed. This form of discipline was characterized by its unhesitating immediacy, its stark practicality, and its singular, unwavering focus on upholding the stringent order absolutely indispensable for collective survival. There existed no latitude whatsoever for abstract philosophical discourse or elaborate ceremonial procedures when the very continuation of life depended entirely upon instantaneous obedience and flawlessly synchronized action. Overhead, a brilliant tapestry of stars began to emerge, their luminous points mirrored in the dark, undulating waters surrounding the ship. Bias, finally granted release, now lay asleep on his bench, likely experiencing true repose for the first time in a full day. His formal punishment had reached its conclusion, yet its profound and pervasive effects were destined to propagate through the intricate dynamics of the crew for many weeks into the future. Every subsequent instance of potential insubordination or laxity would undoubtedly be weighed and judged against the enduring, vivid memory of a man bound immovably to the mast, exposed beneath the relentless, scorching sun. A man, once confined to a ship's mast beneath a relentless sun, endures a stark form of maritime justice. As one contemplates the inherent challenges of life at sea, it becomes clear how its stringent boundaries forged unique systems of accountability. In an environment where evasion is impossible, secrecy non-existent, and collective survival hinges on impeccable cooperation, punitive measures transcended mere retribution. They served as an indispensable pedagogical tool, instilling the paramount lesson of naval existence. The crew's fate is inextricably linked. They either prosper or perish together. Transitioning from the intimate severity of a sailor's punishment at sea, the narrative now transports an observer to the most venerable theatrical arena of the ancient world. Here, the purpose is not to behold a dramatic presentation, but to witness justice enacted as a grand public spectacle. The observer is positioned among the stone tiers of the Theatre of Dionysus in Athens, gazing down upon the expansive circular orchestra where a civic judgment is poised to unfold before an assembly of 15,000 citizens. The theater itself stands as a magnificent testament to Hellenic ingenuity, meticulously sculpted into the natural slope beneath the Acropolis. Its gracefully curved marble seating ensures that every utterance from the performance space resonates with pristine clarity to the uppermost rows. Typically, this hallowed ground stages the profound tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles, or the biting comedies of Aristophanes, illustrious dramatic works that delve into the complexities of human nature through myth and narrative. Yet, on this particular day, the essence of humanity is being scrutinized through the unvarnished reality of communal punishment. The proceedings concern 3 individuals indicted for the misappropriation of funds designated for essential public infrastructure. It is crucial to note that this is not a preliminary hearing. Their guilt has already been conclusively established. Today's assembly is solely dedicated to the administration of their sentence. The decision to utilize the theater as the venue stems from the nature of their offenses, crimes committed against the collective populace, thereby dictating that justice be delivered with the utmost transparency and visibility. The observer watches as the trio of convicted men are escorted into the orchestra by city magistrates. Their attire consists of simple tunics. Their feet are bare, and their hands are bound with rope, a stark visual counterpoint to the elaborate vestments typically donned by thespians gracing this very stage. The morning sun, now ascendant, casts its illuminating rays upon them, akin to actors in a tragic play, save for the grim reality that their impending suffering will be authentic, not merely portrayed. The vast amphitheater gradually fills as citizens ascend the stone steps, seeking vantage points that offer an unobstructed view of the impending proceedings. An atmosphere of distinct anticipation permeates the air, differing markedly from the artistic excitement preceding a dramatic performance. Instead, It is a complex blend of civic obligation intertwined with a palpable, perhaps unsettling, curiosity. Many attendees have brought provisions of food and wine, settling in as if for an extended form of public entertainment, which, in a profound sense, it undeniably is. The punitive process commences with a phase of profound public degradation. A herald, possessing a voice meticulously trained to project across the entire expanse of the theater, meticulously recites the charges leveled against each man. The crimes are detailed with exacting precision, the exact sums embezzled, the specific public projects consequently delayed, and the intricate methods by which the theft was unearthed and investigated. This extensive recitation consumes nearly an hour, transforming the men's acts of dishonesty into a resonant, almost epic saga of civic treachery. What profoundly impresses the observer about this public declaration is its capacity to transmute private transgressions into shared community narratives. Each citizen present, listening intently, gains a clear understanding of precisely how these men's actions impaired the city's capacity to maintain its sacred temples, repair its vital roadways, and finance its cherished festivals. The punishment, therefore, extends beyond the mere chastisement of individual offenders. It serves as a potent mechanism for reinforcing societal bonds and shared ethical principles through the collective witnessing of justice's enactment. Following the protracted reading, the physical chastisement begins. Each man is condemned to receive 50 lashes with a whip, administered by highly skilled executioners whose expertise lies in maximizing pain and theatrical impact without inflicting fatality. These whips are specifically designed for public use, possessing greater length and visual flair than the simpler instruments found in gymnasiums, featuring multiple leather thongs that create striking visual effects upon impact. The first man, a middle-aged contractor identified as Lysias, is firmly secured to a robust wooden post erected at the very core of the orchestra. The executioner deliberately elevates his whip, allowing the assembled throng to fully apprehend the extended reach of the leather thongs before it descends with brutal force across Lysias's back. The resounding crack reverberates through the theater like a peal of thunder, prompting spectators even in the furthest rows to lean forward, seeking a clearer perspective of the unfolding agony. The inherent theatricality of the setting profoundly amplifies every facet of the punishment. Lysias's anguished cries of pain carry to every single seat with the same acoustic perfection that typically serves the voices of tragic actors. His blood, which soon begins to seep from the lacerations inflicted by the whip, is distinctly visible to thousands of onlookers, each able to discern the precise details of his suffering. The entire ordeal thus evolves into a shared, visceral experience, uniting the community through the collective witnessing of justice's harsh application. Between each series of lashes, the executioner deliberately pauses, allowing the multitude to fully observe the gruesome results and granting the condemned man the full psychological weight of his public exposure. Lysias, in his agony, can discern the faces of citizens he has known for years, individuals who once engaged his services for construction, neighbors from his own district, and former companions who now observe his profound humiliation with expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to genuine pity or outright revulsion. The second individual to endure punishment is Nicanor, a younger man who had served as Lysias's assistant. His ordeal unfolds in a similar fashion, yet the observer notes a subtle divergence in the crowd's reactions, evidently influenced by their prior knowledge of the individuals involved. Some spectators vocally interject comments concerning Nicanor's family, his earlier reputation, his youth, and perceived foolishness. The punishment thus becomes an interactive spectacle, with the audience actively participating through their verbal interjections and responses. The observer reflects on how the specific theatrical space profoundly shapes the underlying meaning of the punishment. In this very setting, where citizens habitually gather to contemplate narratives concerning justice, honor, and the inescapable repercussions of human actions, the real-life retribution assumes an almost mythic dimension. The convicted men are transformed into archetypal figures within a living morality play, their visceral suffering transmuted into a potent lesson regarding civic virtue and the steep cost of betraying communal trust. The third criminal, an elderly man named Theophrastus, presents a more intricate challenge to public sentiment. His advanced age renders the physical punishment considerably harsher in appearance, and a murmur begins to ripple through a segment of the spectators, suggesting that 50 lashes might prove fatal for him. However, others vociferously contend that age offers no exoneration for theft, and that extending clemency to criminals merely emboldens further transgressions. This debate proliferates throughout the crowd, spreading like concentric ripples across a body of water. As Theophrastus endures his punishment, it becomes evident how the theater setting facilitates a unique form of democratic engagement in the administration of justice. The collective reactions of the crowd, their cheers, jeers, expressions of contentment or discomfort, generate a direct feedback loop that influences both the executioner's technique and the overarching ambiance of the event. This is not merely punishment observed by the public, it is punishment actively molded by public sentiment. The executioner, keenly aware of his performance for thousands of discerning spectators, subtly adjusts his technique throughout the entire proceedings. When the crowd appears to crave more visceral drama, he delivers harder blows, designed to produce more striking visual effects. Conversely, should they seem to approach their saturation point for gore, he tempers his force while meticulously maintaining a rhythmic application that sustains their engagement. He functions as a complex figure, part adjudicator, part performer, and a skilled artisan of controlled brutality. Following the cessation of the physical punishment, a final component of public degradation is enacted. Each man is compelled to walk slowly around the circumference of the orchestra, openly displaying his wounds to the entire assembled audience. While a herald proclaims their specific crimes one final time, this agonizing perimeter walk occupies several minutes for each man, meticulously ensuring that every single spectator gains an unequivocal view of the consequences for those who plunder from the public treasury. This walk of shame reveals a spectrum of individual responses to profound public humiliation. Lysias keeps his head bowed, seemingly utterly broken by the harrowing experience. Nicanor endeavors to preserve some semblance of dignity, walking upright despite his evident pain. Theophrastus, perhaps too aged and severely injured to concern himself with outward appearances, stumbles laboriously around the circle, relying heavily on a staff thoughtfully provided by the executioner. As the formal administration of punishment concludes, the observer notes the gradual dispersal of the crowd, imbued with the satisfied demeanor of those who have witnessed justice meticulously served. Conversations erupt among neighbors and acquaintances discussing the perceived appropriateness of the sentences. the comportment of the condemned men, and the overall efficacy of public punishment as a deterrent to future offenses. The theater has unequivocally fulfilled its profound function as a communal space for forging bonds through a shared moral experience. A contingent of citizens lingers, drawn by a lingering curiosity to observe the immediate aftermath. The three men are finally released from their restraints and permitted to retrieve their clothing and personal effects before departing the theater. They move slowly, their pain undeniably evident, yet they are free to return to their homes and attempt to reconstruct their shattered lives. The punishment, though severe, was ultimately temporary, unlike the irreversible consequences of exile or execution. It thus retains the slender possibility of their eventual reintegration into the wider community. The observer joins the outward flow of the crowd as it streams through the theater's exits, re-entering the vibrant, everyday life of the city. Vendors readily sell refreshments and wine to the departing spectators. Children, who had borne witness to the morning's grim spectacle, engage in games that subtly incorporate elements of what they have just seen. Adults continue to dissect the morning's events with the same analytical fervor they might typically apply to reviewing a profound tragic drama, underscoring the enduring impact of the public demonstration of justice. As one ascends the ancient stone steps leading away from the venerable theater of Dionysus, a profound contemplation arises concerning the manner in which the dramatic setting transmuted the very essence of punishment into something far more intricate than mere retaliatory justice. The majestic splendor of the architectural design, the deeply ingrained ritualistic components of the ceremonial proceedings, and the extensive participation of multitudes of citizens collectively contributed to this transformation, elevating individual chastisement into a grand, communal affirmation of deeply held societal values. The fading afternoon sun now casts elongated, spectral shadows across the rows of vacant theater seats. The central orchestra, the very stage upon which justice was once so publicly enacted, now lapses back into a profound silence, patiently awaiting its next dramatic presentation. This might be a poignant tragedy penned by an illustrious poet, or perhaps another solemn morning dedicated to the public administration of punishment. In the historical context of ancient Athens, both categories of performance served an identical, fundamental purpose: to assist the community in comprehending its own identity and ethos through the vivid, public dramatization of myriad human narratives. As evening descends and one seeks repose, a compelling thought might arise regarding the ingenious way the ancient Greeks utilized their most aesthetically pleasing and architecturally sophisticated public edifice for a dual purpose, encompassing both artistic expression and judicial pronouncements. The very same architectural characteristics that imbued tragic poetry with its formidable emotional resonance also served to transform public punishment into a potent form of civic education. Through meticulously orchestrated spectacles of ignominy and physical suffering, profound lessons about honor, the immutable principles of justice, and the overarching responsibilities inherent in community membership were powerfully imparted. Having borne witness to the theatrical drama of public punishment in the bustling polis of Athens, one might then find oneself transported to a markedly different Greek city-state, a place where the concept of shame operated according to an entirely distinct set of regulations. Here, one stands in the sun-baked, dusty training ground situated just beyond the formidable walls of Sparta, observing with keen interest how the most feared military society in the ancient world dispensed its own unique brand of justice. This Spartan justice placed an uncompromising premium on honor, holding it in higher esteem than life itself, and indeed, regarding death as a preferable alternative to the enduring stain of dishonor. The man who is currently the focus of this somber observation bears the name Pantis. Only yesterday, he committed an act that Spartans universally regarded as the gravest transgression imaginable. He abandoned his designated position during the throes of battle, not due to a debilitating wound, nor in compliance with a strategic order to retreat, but rather because an overwhelming surge of fear eclipsed his rigorous training, compelling him to flee from the enemy lines. In the more lenient Athenian context, such an offense might merely warrant exile or public humiliation. In Sparta, however, it signifies a fate far more dreadful than mere physical demise. The solemn ceremony commences precisely at dawn, when the morning air retains a refreshing coolness, and the expansive training ground remains utterly deserted save for Pontus, his immediate military unit, and the cadre of stern officers who are tasked with overseeing the execution of his punishment. There are no curious throngs of citizens, no elaborate theatrical staging, only the stark, unadorned functionality that so comprehensively defines every aspect of Spartan existence. The punishment is conducted in strict privacy, a reflection of the profound belief that the shame associated with such an act is far too deep and personal for any public spectacle. Pontus stands rigidly at attention, clad in his full military panoply, a gleaming bronze helmet, a sturdy leather cuirass, protective bronze greaves shielding his shins, and the iconic circular hoplon shield, which unequivocally identifies him as a Spartan warrior. His spear rests upright beside him, its burnished bronze point catching the nascent light of the morning. To any casual observer, he embodies the quintessential image of Greek military prowess, yet every individual present is acutely aware that he is on the precipice of forfeiting the very right to call himself a soldier. The unit commander, a formidable battle-hardened veteran named Alcibiades, addresses Pantus in the terse, economical style favored by Spartans. "Pantus, son of Cleomenes," he intones, his voice devoid of emotion, "you have irrevocably sundered the sacred bond that unites warrior and city. You have made the ignoble choice of life over honor and safety over the imperative of duty. The dire consequences of this unforgivable choice must now be rendered visibly manifest to all who serve alongside you." The initial component of this arduous punishment involves the shield, the venerable hoplon that every Spartan warrior proudly bears, and which profoundly symbolizes his unwavering commitment to the disciplined phalanx formation. Pantus is commanded to carefully place his shield upon the ground directly before him, then to grasp a heavy hammer and methodically, deliberately dismantle it, while his fellow soldiers observe in stony silence. Each resounding blow against the bronze rim reverberates across the otherwise quiet training ground, echoing with the mournful cadence of a funeral drum. One watches as Pantus raises the hammer, his hands visibly trembling with an almost unbearable burden. This shield has been his constant companion for 8 arduous years, accompanying him through countless grueling training sessions and 3 major, bloody battles. Its bronze surface bears the indelible marks of combat, dents from enemy weaponry, scratches from traversing rugged terrain, and the rich, protective patina that accrues from years of meticulous maintenance. It is far more than a mere piece of military equipment. It is an intrinsic symbol of his very identity as a Spartan warrior. The systematic destruction of the shield is both methodical and devastatingly complete. First, the bronze rim is relentlessly hammered until it splits and buckles into grotesque contortions. Subsequently, the sturdy wooden core is systematically broken apart. The leather grips are savagely torn free, and the bronze faceplate is bent irrevocably beyond any hope of repair. By the time Pantis completes this agonizing task, nothing remains but scattered, inert fragments of bronze, wood, and leather, the desolate corpse of a shield that once valiantly protected both him and his comrades in the crucible of battle. Yet this physical annihilation is merely the initial phase of the profound punishment. Next follows the symbolic divestment of every article that identifies Pantis as a Spartan citizen. His distinctive helmet is gently yet firmly removed from his head by another soldier. His cuirass is meticulously unlaced and then carefully taken off. His greaves are methodically pulled from his legs. His spear, the very instrument of his martial prowess, is deliberately broken in half, and the sundered pieces are unceremoniously tossed onto the growing pile of shield fragments. As each piece of essential equipment is removed, Alcibiades recites its profound significance. This helmet safeguarded your head so that you might protect your brothers in arms. This armor enveloped your body so that you might steadfastly cover the battle line. This spear afforded you reach so that you might repel enemies from your comrades. All of these now possess no meaning, for you chose craven fear over unyielding courage. The most utterly devastating segment of the entire ceremony transpires when Pantis is compelled to remove his distinctive red cloak, the iconic garment that unequivocally marks every Spartan warrior and about which mothers purportedly admonish their sons to return with it or on it. This vibrant cloak represents nothing less than full membership in the revered warrior brotherhood, active participation in the sacred fraternity of men who have solemnly sworn to embrace death rather than countenance retreat. One cannot help but observe the varied reactions among the other soldiers during this particularly poignant part of the punishment. Some maintain unwavering gazes straight ahead, their expressions as unyielding as stone, rigidly upholding the iron discipline that Spartan training has so deeply ingrained within them. Others, however, struggle to conceal their profound discomfort at witnessing one of their own being systematically stripped of every single element that defines Spartan identity. A select few display overt disgust, directed not at the severity of the punishment itself, but rather at the egregious act of cowardice that rendered such a drastic measure tragically necessary. Pantis now stands before them, clad only in a simple tunic, appearing more akin to a helot slave than a proud citizen warrior. But the punishment is not yet complete. He must now formally and unequivocally renounce his claim to Spartan citizenship by articulating the words of self-banishment. I am no longer worthy to stand with the valiant men of Lacedaemon. I choose exile over the honor I have already irrevocably lost. These words seem to exact an enormous, almost unbearable effort for him to utter. His voice audibly cracks on the word unworthy and barely whispers the final, desolate, lost. It becomes painfully apparent that this verbal renunciation is a more arduous ordeal for him than the physical destruction of his equipment. Breaking the shield merely destroyed his capacity to fight. Speaking these harrowing words obliterates his very identity as a Spartan. What transpires next is arguably the most exquisitely cruel aspect of the entire punishment. Pontus is presented with a stark, agonizing choice. He can depart Sparta immediately and forever, living out the remainder of his life in ignominious exile among strangers who will never truly accept him. Or he can elect to restore some semblance of his lost honor through the ultimate act of death. A gleaming dagger is carefully placed upon the ground directly before him, and he is informed that he has until sunset to arrive at his profound decision. The unit then disperses, leaving Pontus utterly alone in the vast training ground, surrounded only by the shattered pieces of his broken shield and the menacing dagger that offers him a final, desperate escape from the suffocating grip of shame. One watches from a discreet distance as he sinks to the dust, sometimes staring fixedly at the lethal weapon, at other times gathering fragments of his shattered shield and attempting, with futile desperation, to piece them back together. It is as if he harbors a fleeting, forlorn hope that he might somehow mend his irrevocably broken honor along with the broken bronze. The psychological torment inherent in this protracted waiting period is meticulously calculated and chillingly precise. Pontus is afforded hours to ruminate upon his terrible choice, a life condemned to perpetual exile and profound shame, or a death that might, in some small measure, restore a modicum of honor to his once proud name. Every agonizing minute that relentlessly ticks by serves as a brutal reminder of all he has lost, and relentlessly compels him to confront the devastating consequences of his fleeting moment of cowardice in the heat of battle. As the sun steadily ascends higher in the sky, one observes other soldiers diligently engaged in their rigorous training routines in distant sectors of the expansive field. They pointedly, almost ostentatiously, ignore Pontus, treating him as if he were already deceased or long departed. This deliberate social invisibility constitutes yet another layer of his profound punishment. He has been systematically erased from the communal fabric even before he makes his ultimate tragic choice concerning exile or death. Midday brings no respite from the relentless psychological pressure. Pontus attempts to consume some bread from his modest pack, but his hands tremble uncontrollably, rendering him unable to tear it properly. He endeavors to drink water from his flask, but his throat appears constricted, seemingly unable to swallow. The unmistakable physical symptoms of extreme, debilitating stress are patently obvious, even from one's distant vantage point. One notes that despite the palpable sense of isolation, Pontus is, in fact, under meticulous and constant observation. Officers strategically positioned around the training ground watch him without interruption, poised to intervene immediately should he attempt to escape without making his fateful choice. The Spartans are resolute in their desire for him to confront his shame directly and unflinchingly, not to evade it through ignominious flight. The afternoon ushers in a few visitors, yet these are not friends offering solace or comfort, but rather family members who arrive to bid their final farewells. Pontus' father, an aged warrior bearing the indelible scars of numerous campaigns against Athens, approaches his son with a countenance as hard and unyielding as granite. Their ensuing conversation is brief, terse, and visibly agonizing for both men. The stoic father departs without offering an embrace to his son, his shoulders rigid and unyielding with tightly controlled emotion. The setting sun cast long shadows as Pontus, his shoulders rigid with a newfound resolve that transcended his earlier turmoil, at last extended a hand towards the waiting dagger. His grip was remarkably firm, a stark contrast to the trembling uncertainty that had perhaps plagued him through the arduous hours of daylight. It was as though the protracted period of profound introspection had meticulously sharpened his perception, granting him an undeniable lucidity regarding the momentous decision he was about to enact. No audible words escaped his lips, yet a silent, poignant articulation seemed to form, a reverent supplication directed towards the omniscient deities, or perhaps a final unspoken valediction intended for fallen compatriots beyond the veil of mortal hearing. The execution of the deed was characterized by its startling rapidity and consummate efficacy, a testament to the ingrained discipline of Spartan military pedagogy, which instilled such exacting exactitude into every facet of martial endeavor. Thus, Pantites met his demise in a manner befitting the ideal Spartan warrior, embracing his ultimate destiny with an unyielding fortitude, confronting it head-on instead of recoiling from its formidable presence. Through this final, decisive act, he managed to reclaim a significant portion of the esteemed honor that had been tragically forfeited by his prior act of timidity. His courageous end served as a powerful, albeit somber, testament to his inherent, albeit latent, valor. Observing from a discreet distance, the Spartan officers, whose vigilant gazes had tracked Pantite's final moments, now advanced towards the lifeless form. Their countenances bore a complex melange of solemnity and a certain austere contentment, reflecting a profound understanding of the unfolding drama. This somber conclusion, while undeniably tragic in its immediate manifestation, was nonetheless perceived as a quintessential demonstration of the rigorous efficacy of Spartan jurisprudence. Here was an individual who, in a critical moment, had succumbed to trepidation rather than upholding his sworn responsibilities, and who had subsequently been compelled by societal pressures to reconcile with the profound implications of that decision. In the end, he had made the ultimate affirmation, prioritizing the inviolable sanctity of honor above the very continuation of his existence. In this stark, uncompromising fashion, the meticulously structured Spartan societal framework had successfully re-established its inherent equilibrium, even though it demanded the ultimate sacrifice of a seasoned combatant. As the day's final golden light began to recede from the austere training grounds, casting long, deepening shadows across the rugged terrain, one could not help but ponder the stark divergence of Spartan punitive practices from all other forms of justice observed across the Hellenic world. While many other celebrated Greek city-states ingeniously deployed the instrument of public opprobrium as a means of fostering moral rectitude or discouraging future transgressions, Sparta, in its singular wisdom, transmuted shame into an uncompromising crucible for evaluating intrinsic character. It functioned as an unyielding arbiter, meticulously distinguishing those deemed truly commendable from those found wanting. The symbolic act of shattering a warrior's shield, for instance, was never conceived as a mechanism to rehabilitate or morally mend the transgressor. Instead, its profound purpose lay in rigorously safeguarding the unblemished integrity and martial excellence of the elite warrior caste. Following the solemn resolution, the lifeless remains were efficiently conveyed away by helots, individuals of subservient status, destined for an unceremonious interment beyond the fortified city ramparts. His resting place would remain perpetually unmarked, devoid of any official funeral rites or public lamentation. Yet, among the cadre of seasoned warriors who had borne witness to the day's profound proceedings, the decisive nature of Pantite's ultimate act would undoubtedly become a persistent subject of contemplation and discourse. He had undeniably faltered in a moment of critical exigency, yet his final, deliberate exit from life was executed with undeniable fortitude. In the uncompromising ethos of Spartan society, such a valorous demise possessed the extraordinary power to atone for even the most grievous of prior transgressions. As the pervasive tranquility of night began to envelop the landscape, inviting a period of much-needed repose, one might find oneself deeply engrossed in a profound meditation upon the chillingly effective mechanisms of a society that unequivocally prioritized the inviolable sanctity of honor above the very continuum of existence. It was a culture that deemed a swift, dignified demise infinitely more desirable than the enduring stain of public ignominy, and one that meticulously engineered its punitive frameworks, not with the aim of reforming the culpable, but rather with the explicit intention of systematically expunging them from the revered fellowship of the truly commendable. Having just observed the stark, uncompromising finality inherent in the Spartan concept of honor-driven demise, the observer's journey now transitioned, bringing them back to the vibrant heart of Athens for a concluding examination of Hellenic punitive methodologies, a form of justice that, in its intricate design, promised to be perhaps the most nuanced and intellectually refined of all. One now found oneself positioned within the hallowed confines of the assembly area upon the iconic Pnyx Hill, a site where the very essence of democratic governance was observed transforming into a meticulous instrument of judicious retribution. This was not a justice characterized by the visceral drama of public executions or the overt spectacle of societal abasement, but rather by the subtle yet profoundly impactful deprivation of a citizen's most cherished and fundamental endowment: their inherent political agency, their voice within the polis. Central to the day's profound deliberations was the figure of Callas, a distinguished and affluent merchant, whose extensive participation had long been woven into the intricate tapestry of Athenian political existence. Notably, he stood accused not of any transgression typically meriting banishment, capital punishment, or corporeal suffering. Instead, the charge leveled against him was one that the discerning citizens of Athens regarded with equally grave concern: the persistent tendering of ill-conceived counsel to the esteemed assembly, which had consistently steered the venerable city towards policies that ultimately proved both detrimental in effect and ruinously costly in their implementation. The punitive measure under earnest consideration was known as atimia, a term literally translated as without honor. This constituted a form of civic capital punishment, a profound decree that would systematically divest Callas of every political prerogative, whilst paradoxically permitting him to persist in his daily life and professional endeavors within the vibrant Athenian metropolis. He would, in essence, be relegated to a status akin to that of a resident foreigner within the very city of his birth. A physical presence whose corporeal form moved amongst his peers, yet whose spirit was irrevocably estranged from the vibrant political discourse and civic engagement that fundamentally bestowed significance upon the concept of citizenship within a democratic framework. One observed the steady procession of citizens ascending onto the Pnyx Hill, each individual converging for the momentous assembly session poised to determine Callas's singular destiny. The very topography of the hill itself stood as an awe-inspiring monument to democratic ingenuity. Meticulously sculpted terraced stone benches, artfully carved into the natural incline, possessed the remarkable capacity to accommodate an impressive 6,000 citizens. Furthermore, its inherent acoustic properties were engineered to flawlessly transmit a speaker's utterance with crystalline clarity to even the most distant rows. This revered locale was, undeniably, the veritable birthplace of democratic governance, the sacred ground where free citizens routinely convened to engage in robust deliberation and to collectively shape the crucial affairs of their illustrious city. The formidable indictment against Callus was eloquently articulated by Demosthenes, a masterfully proficient orator. He passionately contended that a recurring pattern of flawed discernment in matters of state constituted a grave manifestation of civic ineptitude, posing a palpable peril to the collective well-being of the entire community. With resonant conviction, he proclaimed, "Fellow citizens of Athens, our intention is not to penalize Callus for a solitary misstep, or even a pair of errors. For indeed, fallibility is an inherent aspect of the human condition, and we all invariably stumble. Rather, our contemplation of punitive action stems from the irrefutable evidence that his errors have been unremittingly consistent, alarmingly foreseeable, and, most significantly, profoundly detrimental to our public treasury and collective prosperity." The accusations leveled against him were meticulously delineated and substantiated by irrefutable documentation. It was recalled that half a decade prior, Callus had ardently championed a trade embargo targeting Corinth, a policy that, while intended to exert pressure, ultimately cost the Athenian exchequer many thousands of drachmas without yielding any discernible strategic advantage. 3 years subsequent, he had lent his considerable influence to a military undertaking that culminated in an unmitigated catastrophe. More recently, in the preceding year, his contentious proposition to curtail vital grain subsidies had dangerously ignited widespread discontent, nearly precipitating civil unrest among the city's impoverished populace. While each individual miscalculation might conceivably be overlooked in isolation, their cumulative weight undeniably painted a stark portrait of persistently flawed discernment, a pattern that gravely imperiled the very stability and prosperity of the city-state. What rendered this particular legal proceeding so profoundly compelling was its distinct departure from conventional charges of venality, sedition, or outright criminal conduct. Instead, the crux of the matter revolved entirely around the concept of civic aptitude and the inherent capacity for sound judgment in public affairs. The sagacious Athenians were, in essence, wrestling with a profound ethical and practical dilemma that continues to vex contemporary democratic societies. How ought one address citizens who, with unwavering regularity, champion policies demonstrably detrimental to the public welfare? Furthermore, how does one judiciously reconcile the sacrosanct principle of uninhibited expression with the imperative to safeguard the collective community from the corrosive effects of persistently misguided counsel? Callus was, in accordance with democratic principles, accorded the solemn privilege of articulating his own defense. His subsequent address served as an unwitting exposition of both the commendable attributes and the inherent deficiencies that had characterized his protracted political engagement. He emerged as undeniably intelligent, remarkably articulate, and genuinely committed to the prosperity of Athens. Nevertheless, a pervasive flaw underscored his career. His judgment had been consistently erroneous, and his unwavering conviction in his personal perspectives had regrettably rendered him impervious to the crucial lessons that might have been gleaned from his repeated miscalculations. He embodied the archetypal citizen whose intentions were undeniably noble, yet whose actions, stemming from a fundamental lack of practical acumen, invariably resulted in deleterious consequences for the police. One could not help but observe the assembly's meticulous attentiveness as both sides presented their respective arguments, a level of scrutiny indicative of individuals keenly aware that their forthcoming verdict would establish a profound and enduring legal precedent. Should they resolve to impose a timea upon Callus, they would, in effect, be formally affirming democracy's inherent prerogative to suppress voices that consistently steered the collective away from sagacious paths. Conversely, a vote against punitive action would signify a tacit acceptance that persistent poor judgment, irrespective of its detrimental impact, constituted an acceptable cost in the unwavering defense of unfettered expression. The impassioned debate persisted throughout the morning hours, as a succession of citizens ascended to the speaker's platform, each contributing their distinct perspective on the intricate case. A segment of the populace argued vociferously that the complete forfeiture of political entitlements represented an excessively severe reprisal for what amounted to mere incompetence. In sharp contradistinction, others maintained with equal fervor that permitting consistently detrimental voices to perpetuate their involvement in democratic deliberations was tantamount to a form of civic self-destruction. These profoundly divergent arguments laid bare the deep-seated philosophical schisms and inherent tensions embedded within the very theoretical framework of democratic governance. Amidst the fervent exchange, an esteemed elderly citizen, identified as Aristophanes, delivered a particularly poignant and persuasive oration concerning the fundamental essence of democratic engagement. "My esteemed fellow Athenians," he commenced, his voice imbued with the weight of experience, "we convene within these hallowed precincts not merely to afford an audience to every conceivable utterance, but more crucially, to give heed to voices imbued with sagacity and sound judgment. If we, as a collective body, lose the vital capacity to discern between those citizens who proffer truly invaluable guidance and those who perpetually steer us astray, then how can the very edifice of democracy conceivably endure the inherent challenges posed by its own cherished liberty?" The actual mechanics of the voting procedure proved intrinsically captivating to observe. Each enfranchised citizen, in turn, deposited a pottery shard into one of two designated urns, one clearly demarcated for a verdict of conviction, the other for an acquittal. While these shards bore a striking resemblance to those traditionally employed in ostracism ballots, the prevailing ambiance was markedly distinct. This was patently not a proceeding designed to eliminate a political adversary or to curb the influence of an individual who had accrued excessive prominence. Rather, its profound essence revolved around the more foundational and enduring inquiry into the very concept of civic efficacy within a democratic framework. As the painstaking tabulation of the votes commenced, one's thoughts inevitably drifted to a contemplation of how profoundly this specific form of retribution diverged from every other punitive measure encountered throughout the Hellenic world. Corporeal punishments, such as the public lashing or exposure, were typically reserved for transgressions directly impacting the physical person. Banishment, conversely, was applied to offenses deemed injurious to the collective community. Atimia, however, addressed an altogether more ethereal and conceptual category of wrongdoing. It was a sanction for offenses committed against the intrinsic quality and integrity of the democratic deliberative process itself. The conclusive tally of the votes ultimately revealed a slender majority advocating for the imposition of atimia. Yet this consequential decision was met not with exuberant acclamations or expressions of triumphal satisfaction. Rather, a palpable sense of gravity pervaded the assembly, as the majority of citizens appeared to grasp that they had executed an action both regrettably necessary and profoundly melancholic. They had, in essence, safeguarded the robust health of their democracy by the very act of suppressing one of its constituent voices, an inherent paradox that engendered a lingering disquietude, even amongst those who had cast their ballots in favor of the punitive measure. The formal ceremony accompanying the imposition of atimia was strikingly characterized by its profound simplicity. A designated herald solemnly proclaimed the Assembly's definitive resolution and formally declared that Callas was henceforth divested of his entitlement to address the Assembly, to cast his vote on matters of public import, to occupy any public office, or to initiate legal proceedings before the courts of justice. His entire political existence, so long a vibrant part of Athenian life, thus concluded with a mere handful of uttered words, delivered with a quiet solemnity devoid of any theatrical flourish or overt drama. Callas, for his part, received the momentous pronouncement with an admirable composure and quiet dignity, offering a slight, deferential bow to acknowledge the Assembly's sovereign decision before gracefully descending from the speaker's rostrum. He remained, in a purely nominal sense, a citizen, retaining the right to reside and pursue his commercial interests within the Athenian polis. However, he had been irrevocably severed from the vibrant political fellowship that fundamentally imbued the concept of citizenship with its deepest meaning. It was, in essence, a form of existential truncation, a partial demise that, while social rather than corporeal, carried implications of profound and enduring consequence for his very being within the community. As the Assembly gradually began to dissipate, its members slowly making their way from the Pnyx, one could distinctly discern fragments of conversation amongst the departing citizens, who were earnestly deliberating the far-reaching ramifications of the momentous action they had just collectively undertaken. A segment expressed genuine apprehension that this newly established precedent might, in time, be manipulated to suppress dissenting perspectives or to silence political adversaries. Conversely, another faction staunchly maintained that a robust democracy inherently required sophisticated mechanisms to safeguard its integrity from individuals whose persistent counsel inflicted more detriment than benefit. The profound philosophical discourse, it was clear, persisted unabated, even in the wake of the formal resolution. Its reverberations linger, even after the formal decree has been formally issued. One observes Callas as he slowly descends from the venerable Pnyx hill, making his way towards the bustling agora. His physical bearing eloquently conveys the profound burden of his recent misfortune, not a corporeal ache, but a more profound anguish stemming from his expulsion from the communal engagements that once imbued his existence with purpose. He has, in essence, endured a form of civic demise, a fate that, in certain respects, could be deemed more severe than mere physical banishment from his homeland. Within the vibrant confines of the agora, Callas encounters his acquaintances and commercial associates, who treat him with an almost fastidious courtesy. Yet, it becomes evident that the very fabric of his relationships has already begun to fray. He is no longer regarded as an individual whose political perspectives carry any significant weight, nor as a figure capable of influencing public policy or advocating for specific interests within the hallowed assembly. His societal standing has undergone a subtle, yet undeniably profound transformation. The afternoon finds Callas diligently occupied in his counting house, meticulously managing his merchant enterprise with the same unwavering proficiency he has consistently demonstrated in commercial endeavors. Ironically, this individual, whose political acumen was deemed detrimental to the polis, exhibits remarkable success in private commerce. This striking dichotomy suggests a compelling distinction between the qualities essential for civic sagacity and those that underpin commercial intelligence. As the day yields to evening, Callas is observed within the sanctuary of his home, surrounded by his family. While his wife and children offer unwavering support, a palpable sense of unease permeates their interactions. The stigma of atimia extends its reach far beyond the individual who receives the punishment, impacting his entire household by diminishing their social standing and political leverage. The punitive consequences thus propagate outwards, creating ripples through familial networks and broader social connections. The most emotionally resonant moment unfolds during dinner, when Callas's adolescent son innocently poses a question regarding political affairs. In bygone days, such inquiries would have presented invaluable opportunities for the father to impart his extensive civic experiences and knowledge. Now, however, a peculiar silence descends, replacing the once lively political discourse. Callas finds himself severed not merely from active participation in the democratic process, but also from his fundamental role in preparing the succeeding generation for civic life. As one prepares to depart from Athens, a reflective pause allows for contemplation on how this ultimate sanction, the systematic stripping away of political voice, represents arguably the most sophisticated form of justice encountered. It inherently acknowledges that within a democratic framework, political discourse is simultaneously an inherent right and a profound responsibility, and that a sustained pattern of ineptitude in public governance can prove just as deleterious as intentional malfeasance. The imposition of atimia illuminates a profound truth about the very essence of Greek democracy. Its foundation was not predicated on the notion that all opinions possess equal merit, but rather on the deeply held conviction that judicious deliberation necessitates the careful discernment between advantageous and detrimental contributions to public discourse. The Athenians were prepared to cede a measure of individual liberty in their unwavering commitment to safeguarding the integrity and quality of their collective decision-making processes. Tonight, as one finally settles into repose after this extensive exploration of Greek punitive measures and judicial philosophies, one might ponder how each distinct form of correction observed reflects disparate facets of ancient values. From the overt, almost theatrical brutality of the bronze bull to the understated, quiet exclusion enforced by atimia, the Hellenes cultivated a remarkably nuanced understanding of how diverse forms of justice could effectively serve a spectrum of societal requirements. And perhaps, as slumber gently beckons, one might find oneself contemplating whether contemporary societies have inadvertently relinquished some of that ancient sophistication in their own approaches to justice. Whether modern punishments genuinely serve their communities with the same efficacy as those that served ancient Athens, and what invaluable insights might be gleaned from these long-past experiments in the intricate art of coexisting harmoniously within a civilized society. A collective entity that has been subjected to profound disparagement. A truly violized society finds itself in a precarious position, often facing widespread condemnation from both internal and external observers. This state of being denotes a community whose fundamental values, governance, or actions have been systematically denounced as morally bankrupt or ethically reprehensible. Such a societal designation typically emerges from perceived egregious transgressions against established norms of human decency or international law, leading to a significant erosion of its legitimacy and standing on the global stage. The pervasive opprobrium cast upon it can foster deep internal divisions, alienating its populace and potentially inviting isolation, thus profoundly shaping its trajectory and identity for generations.